Okay, great. Kathleen?
Okay, can I have a motion to come out of executive session at 6:03?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call?
Okay. Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes.
Mr. Dozen?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. Mr. Peters?
And Mr. Peterson is absent,
Yep.
just on recording, so
Okay.
4-0.
So item 3, work session. We have item A, we have our work session items. We're going to start with our TDA recap of the timeline. So if you're ready.
So the first item you're asking is a recap of the timeline?
Yes.
Well, we are probably 3 weeks away from the design development deadline, should we start today. After which time we're planning on presenting the design development presentation to the board in June. So that would be a presentation just like we did a schematic design, where we talk about here's the design, here's the budget, here's the schedule, here's how we line up against the budget, and then we talk about strategies to get you back within that budget. So GMP is right now set for September. So September is when our guaranteed maximum price documents are due. We're talking about breaking ground in October, and then conform documents a month later, so in full-blown construction. And that's contingent upon, of course, our wetlands approvals and everything.
Board members, any questions?
Well, just a question, so the guaranteed maximum price, so, until we get there,
Right.
we're, it's estimating, right? And so,
Correct.
and so right now, the trending of the cost is chewing into the excess funds we were hoping to use in the high school and the middle school. So how would, is there a way for us to understand, or draw like a guideline or a parameter that says, okay, like let's say if the board said, you know what, we really don't want to go below $4 million, we want to leave at least $4 million, let's just pick a number, like $4 million, because we have really important priorities at the other schools. Is that, like, do you need direction, like specific direction like that says, here's the number? Because we've kind of left it open-ended right now, so whatever, if it goes higher, it goes higher, and then we have less money for the other
Yes,
schools.
and strategically, we agreed to do that together, right? We talked about, let's get through schematic design, let's see where we're at, and which we've just done. So now we kind of know where we're at. Now's the time when we want to establish a budget, because if you can establish a budget in those parameters, we'll get you there.
At what point would it be where could you, because some of this is we're flying a bit blind because we don't know what would that mean if we said, let's say you use that $4 million, right? So it's, okay, you've got to bring the new building in at $40 million or under, right? And so, but we don't know what those trade-offs are, right? And so it's kind of like a sequencing thing, right? So is that something where you can come to us with, here's some options, you could shave $1 million if you wanted to change the siding material, or what are the trade-offs, so that we can say, oh, you know what, I think maybe we'd want to make that trade-off and put more money into the other schools.
Sure, so what the kind of the process by which we go through, we've already done in schematic design, we're about to do again for design development, is we develop the plans, we do an estimate, construction does an estimate, we reconcile those estimates, then we create a gigantic list of value engineering, VE options, to get us back within our budget. Some of those are built ultimates, some of those are easy, right? If we've already determined we want carpet, maybe there's another carpet that saves us 50 cents a square foot, and that amounts to a lot in the building size. So there are some options. We usually do that we don't usually do that work session with the board. Usually there are board representatives in our meetings that are going through the core meetings, and we are reporting out the options, or what we've arriven at through this value engineering exercise. Now, there are 2 different kinds, right? So there's 3 different kinds. The first kind is absolutely not, we don't want to consider that option. The second is, yes, that makes total sense, let's just do it. And the third is there any way we can bid that as an alternate? So what that does, that takes that out of that GMP price. When they bid it after the guaranteed maximum price, they go to get a price on that. And some are easy to do and some are tough to do. So an example of a tough one would be doing a different type of flooring system that's deeper, which means our whole slab is depressed. That'd be a tough one, but if we could do different types of tile that are the same thickness, that's a pretty easy thing to go out and get a couple different prices on. So it's the big stuff that's tough. So if we said, let's just go get a price on what it would cost to go do the pre-K wing, that would be a very difficult one to do because that's a big alternate. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess I'm still trying to understand from a direction standpoint from the board, because, obviously we haven't, so we have a request out. I know Chris was out for a bit, and he's back in, and we're, the board is looking for, what are our priorities on the high school and middle school, like that extra money, right? Because we've got this long laundry list of things that we were going to work on. But we don't know when you go from $5 million down to $3 million, what are we missing? Which means that that's going to have to come out of PI budget or general fund budget. So to be able to assess that says, okay, by allowing a building to cost $41 million, right, and only having $3 million left over, here's what we're left. Here's the trade-off. We're not going to be able to replace roofs or windows or whatever the priority list is. Because at some point it is all about trade-offs, right? There's only so much money in the pot, and the more we allow to go into the new building, the less we have for the other building, which means it's got to come out of somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, I don't know if I can speak for Chris, but I think when that budget was developed for the middle school, high school, it was like $10 million in needs, but listen, I think we can carve out 5. So I know that you've got way more needs than you have budget as it stands.
Right.
I'd have to rely on Chris for maybe prioritizing this and coming up with the must-dos versus the who likes. My guess is you've got a lot of must-haves.
Right.
So I understand the position that you're in.
But the board can direct the team to say, we want $4 or $5 million for the high school projects.
Right.
Or middle school, high school projects, and we'll come up with options.
Right.
I mean, I won't come up with any of them, but these guys will come up with options to get you there.
Right. So here, my
And
question
it could
is,
be any number of things, and, it could be eliminate square footage. Again, I'd always go to that first, because that's generally where the most money is, but it could also be reduce the windows by 20%.
Right.
Or go to
Right, yeah.
OSFC minimums on windows,
Right.
or, there's any number of ways to carve money out. Whether that's going to be acceptable to the majority of the board or not,
Right.
we can certainly present those.
right, so I'm talking about, because we're talking about timeline, I'm talking about when would the board need to tell you that, right? Because right now, and we're talking about timeline, so it's like, okay, yeah, right now, we kind of left it open-ended, but when would you need to say, this building, you can only get $39 million for it, or $40 million for it, or whatever the number is? If the board wanted to put a
The
line.
sooner the better, because we're about to go into the DD estimate. And once they finish DD documents, they do an estimate, and Shook does an estimate, as Chris stated. And if the desire is, we want $5 million, or 5.5, or 4.5, whatever the number is for these other projects, that's going to get us to a number that the elementary has to cost. Now, there are some things you can't cut. I mean, you can't, generally site costs, you can't really reduce, but we can take a look at things. They'll come up with a list of suggestions, and if you want to do those things, you can do those things.
I would want to be a little bit more definitive. We're entering the next phase after design development where we're creating the bid documents. So we still can't have things in flux when we're in that level. We're creating exactly the documents that we build buildings off of. So, and actually we're kind of in that design development. So I would say that, if you had guidance right now, that would be great.
Well, here's what I think we need. I think we need a work session where we have, this is the focus and a discussion. And you say, here's where we're at. Here's, I don't know, low-hanging fruit. Here are some things that if you took them off, they're nice things, that you could end up getting this amount of money. We need that guidance. That's where we're at right now. And, let's pick a day and then in the next couple weeks and let's get that done.
I think, well, the tough part is, we were literally a week away from design development, which had started the estimating phase, which had been the most current set of documents. The schematic design documents that we've presented are already out of date. And let me explain. So with not most, every other district, we're estimating, but we're still drawing. So when we say it takes a year to design a building and 2 years to build it, that year includes kind of rolling reviews. So yes, we're reviewing, but we're also drawing the next phase, or estimating while we're drawing and so on. And that kind of catches up all at the GMP phase, where we sit down and actually negotiate the guaranteed maximum price for the building. And everything is an estimate up until that point. Even their guaranteed maximum price is based on an estimate. So you don't bid until after they set their guaranteed maximum price. So what we've done is we just presented schematic design to you, right? And you're scratching your heads going, well, wait, you guys already did design development, we didn't get to put our voices in the schematic design. That's typical in our process. So you relying on your executive team to work through those value engineering things, to set the budget, and we'll get there. So usually, the Board of Education isn't involved in every single one of those value engineering ideas. It's really kind of approving a GMP and we're moving forward. So if we work at the desire of the board. So if that's what you want to do, we'll absolutely do that. I would urge you that the time to do that is probably after that design development. After we have time to estimate those, we're going to present in June. I would suggest we do a work session after that design development before we go into the guaranteed maximum price. Would be my
So that's
recommendation.
not too late.
No, it's not. Because like I said, we're so close to finishing our design development that if we could start back up and finish that design development and then start the estimating, we'll reconcile, we'll come with a list of value engineering options. Then we can have a work session. And if you desire to have it go forward, we'll do it with the whole board and we'll sit down and go through. That's in, that's out. This is an alternate. This is unacceptable to us.
But it would be helpful as we go into the estimating to know what the goal is. You know, is it to get 4 million, 5 million, 6 million, 3 million, whatever that goal is that you want the remainder to be? That's helpful because that then informs kind of, I know we want to get the best builder we can for the lowest amount of money. I mean, it's easily stated. But if you tell us we want 5 million or 4 million, then we know what we're solving for in X and how to come up with enough ideas to get you to X. And then whether those are palatable or not, you get to make those calls.
When you say we want 4 million or 5 million, do you mean leftover to
Yeah.
use? Okay.
As a remainder, you know, there's two ways to develop your budget. What we heard, and perhaps inaccurately, at a board meeting was we want to get the elementary done correctly. And so the process we went about was we once shook that on board, and they're the estimating folks. We said, okay, where are elementary schools coming in? And we said, we're seeing elementaries coming in at approximately $263 a square foot. Then it's just math times the square footage that you got through meeting with the teachers and all the stakeholders, about 150 some odd thousand square feet. Do the math, that was the budget. We had a conversation with your treasurer, what's the expected interest earnings on that money? And that's probably, I think it's a conservative number. But again, interest is one of those things you don't want to assume you're going to have all the interest on the last day of the project that you need to spend beforehand. So you have to be fairly conservative on a cash flow basis. But if you tell us the number's 3.5 or 4 million, we can come up with suggestions for how to get there. You know, it's,
So
we can do that.
And I apologize, I know it's in the paperwork, but if you could tell us where you're at now, you know, I know it's different than where we were at a year ago when we passed the bond. And then if Chris, you could come up and tell us what we could do with the money that's left over currently. Does that make sense?
When you say where we're at, what does that mean?
Where you are, I know the project is costing more than you originally projected. So what's the current
cost,
number, current cost, sorry?
We're about, the total project is 41.6.
41.
Is that-
Okay.
Yeah, 41.6, and so if you do kind of you have approximately, the bond issue was 44.5, refresh my recollection. You're expecting about $1 million of interest, so you're at 45.5. Well, that assumes I have my glasses in.
I can't help you. Maybe I can offer a suggestion, because I don't know if Chris is gonna be able to come up and off the top of his head rattle off the top priorities in every building and what each of them
He might
costs.
be able to.
We are meeting again in another week for that public forum. What if we scheduled a work session in front of it where we could have Chris come and show us, like, where are our trade-offs? Like, what's the list of highest priorities, right? And maybe the board could have a conversation about, do we want to settle on a number that says, look, we need to have at least X amount of dollars left over, so then you have better direction on trade-offs.
Great.
With
So
that.
explain to me, just, I don't do what you do, so you were drawing the footprint, correct? So there's some other things we still have to talk about, like, you know, Mrs. Kramer had asked about the insulation blocks.
Yes.
That is an example of something that has to be decided immediately. Is that correct, where you're at
Yeah,
in
we
the
did.
process, is that right? I'm
Yeah,
not
but
understanding.
So let me kind
So
of
could
talk
I
about
change
that
pots?
process.
Are we talking about, because we're having a public engagement meeting next week where there's some concerns from some people, from teachers and community members. They're talking about inside the, of the building. So is that sort of thing, can that be changed easily at this point?
No.
Or are we just talking
So-
footprint? That's what I'm trying to,
So schematic design is, I think David described it properly in saying that it's basically a 40-ish drawing set that talks about all aspects of the building. So, and there's narratives that go, while the mechanical systems aren't detailed out, there's a narrative that goes along with that talks about the type of mechanical system, and then our estimators are applying, well, we've done so many of those, we think it's going to be about X amount of dollars, and that's kind of the level of estimating that's happening at this schematic design level. Our next step is design development. We may have how many sheets of drawings? Hundreds of sheets of drawings at design development. Getting into, that's the phase that I talked about very early in the project, about when we first apply engineering to the project. So we are actually detailed out and engineered a lot of that system. It's probably 75% complete at the end of design development, and that's where we're at right now. So we've been drawing for 8 months now and designing. So it's much more than just a footprint. It's a lengthy design process. And if I could talk a little bit about the ICFs that you've asked us about. One of the first things we consider at that educational visioning session that we started out with was to set priorities for the project. And one of the priorities was to build our building with flexibility. So that 20 years down the road, if we want to change something, and we're not locked into a masonry building like this that we can't easily change, or change without too much trouble. So you can renovate and you can change, you can adapt to changing times and different trends. So that was one aspect. When we design a building system, which means the exterior wall system, interior wall systems, we start early with a concept. We think through a lot of different things. What's the interior finishes going to be? Are there some areas of the building that want to be masonry, like locker rooms and stuff like that, that we think that it makes sense to do? So then we're weighing that with security issues. We're weighing it with environmental issues. We're weighing that with insulation properties and building envelope properties. We're also weighing that with cost, times that you can erect, constructability, all of those issues go into it. The building that we've currently designed is partially steel framed and partially masonry bearing for just those reasons that I just talked about. So now to kind of say, we really want to look at these insulated concrete forms. That's a completely different structural system. It's a completely different wall system. That's how, I just want to let you know how we got to where we're at right now.
right?
Um,
So let me explain something
Sure.
that is weighing on some of us. So we're accountable to the taxpayers, okay? And so we're expected, to put a set of values on as well. So your direction is coming from a group of people that are not elected officials, that aren't accountable in the same way we are. So it's a little difficult when we're referring to that group respectively, because our situation is a little bit different than that group. So taking direction from them doesn't mean that that's the direction that the board, who's allocated, with the funds, is, advocating for. So I understand, but this board has not weighed in, at least in some of our minds, on some of the decisions that have already moved forward.
Yeah,
And
so,
that's the concern.
yeah, and I can appreciate that, and I also
Mike?
want to reiterate that we do serve at the pleasure of the board. So if you direct us right now that you do not want the interior to be flexible, you want it to be masonry or something solid, we'll relook at those properties, 100%.
And I'm not saying that, but we were not on those committees, so
No, but we empower those committees.
I
Those committees are
understand that.
working in our-
I understand that. But I'm trying to be respectful to the board members' concerns that now feel like they need to weigh in on some of these things.
We had our chance, I just put it that way.
Well, I don't think everybody shares that opinion.
Which I just have a specific question. And I was at some of the community meetings where people were weighing in. And I feel badly that this idea, this insulated concrete form idea was like brought up at a very late date. And my apologies for that. But it also came up after we found out that the city has no interest in solar. because they want to buy their own, or they want to use their own transformer, and it's a joint project. And it came out after we found out in February that we're not going to pursue LEED certification, although I still don't have the calculations for that, which I'd like to get. And we do have a number of community members who have an interest in making this project environmentally sustainable. So I thought this might be a way to, like, since we're at this point not going to use solar, we're not going to pursue LEED certification, at least it would be one way to keep the operating costs down and put up an insulated building, or a building that has very good insulation. And you know, my understanding from using those insulated concrete forms is there's very little waste at the project. So I'd like some specific, I feel badly that you're delayed, but I'd like to know, like, how much. My understanding is there's a significant savings in energy costs if we use those, and there's some significant savings or reduction in waste at the project if we use those. So I'd like to know some numbers as to our operating costs. And I realize they're only estimates, but your operating costs using the insulated concrete forms on a going forward basis after the building is operating versus what you currently have proposed. So that's what I'm interested in, because we have a duty to some of our constituents to put up a building that's environmentally sustainable, and this might be one way to do it.
Sure, so, and we'll address that discussion. I'm gonna let Chris talk and David talk here in just a second. What I would encourage, what we found was helpful in interacting and working with the board is give us the problem to solve, don't solve the problem for us. So don't assign a building material or a system to us. Tell us what your goal is. If the goal is to be environmentally friendly and make sure that we're getting the best well-insulated buildings so that our mechanical equipment have to operate less and using less energy, you know, that's a goal. That's a good thing, right? I mean, that's what we've been operating off of. Don't kind of assign us the solution. So just, I'll leave it with that. And Chris or David, you want to?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. You know, I've gone through a couple of analyses on projects for insulated concrete forms. You are correct, they are more energy efficient than the traditional way this building was built with block and brick. They're more energy efficient in the walls. You'll get a higher R value. I believe the math will show that the steel frame building, well insulated, has a higher R value in the walls than insulated concrete forms does, which is what is currently being designed for most of your building. You're a steel frame building with insulation, and you can address kind of your wall sections. Whether there's waste or not, it's, you know, at best you would say the insulated concrete forms and the steel frame are roughly the same cost. You're moving money around in terms of labor and other things. I will tell you, everybody is focused on being as efficient as possible and focusing on the operational cost long term. That's one of the reasons to do the transformer. I mean, you can get a transformer free from First Energy, but they will charge you approximately 20% more per year for electrical use than if you don't buy the transformer. So it has roughly a 5-year payback if you own your own transformer. It doesn't change your energy consumption. It just changed the price at which you're paying for your energy consumption. It is cheaper not to do LED lighting today, but the payback is 3 or 4 years, so the project currently has LED lighting in it. Those are things that cost more today, but are being done for an operational reason because it saves money long-term and makes the building more operationally sound long-term. We're working very hard, and I point to Ryan here because he's been leading with the civil engineer to make sure we're not disturbing, we're minimizing that footprint because of the parking lot and everything else, and trying to become as energy or as efficient in the design of the school as possible, because that's going to save operating dollars long-term. You know, solar has its issues. I mean, there are ways, if you want to be greener when you buy energy, my recommendation would be do an RFQ and require that your energy provider, you can buy electricity from anybody, that they have a certain amount of their energy from a renewable source. And you get it in a more efficient way than if you do it yourself. So, you know, I was part of an RFP recently for Cleveland Schools, where that was one of the items that was identified as something they were looking at in their electrical provider, was that they were getting X amount of energy from renewable sources, whether that's solar, geothermal, or wind, or whatever method. There are ways to get to those things that address the policy issue, which is important. I mean, no one's diminishing the policy interest, but it's how to get there in the most effective way. But if we can identify what the policy issues we're trying to get to, we can come up with solutions that get you there in the most cost-effective manner.
I would also just add that, remember when we talked about the presumptions that we come to a project with or whatever, we were told very directly in our interview, and then again in the environment, or the educational visioning session, and then again and again and again, especially by the guy that has to operate these buildings, do not make the same mistakes that were done in this building, in the high school building. And that means a variety of things, right? So one of the things that we weren't going to propose to you a system that's not tried and true in this area. There's not one school in Cuyahoga County that's done with ICFs. There's only 13 in the entire state of Ohio, of which 11 are less than 40,000 square feet. So it hasn't been tested. We've got a builder that's actually built a school with the insulated concrete forms. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris. A building, a commercial building?
Well, almost separate from that one.
If you have to get to the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe even separate from that, one comment I would like to add is I feel like maybe we have some confusion, we may have been the ones who created it, around pursuing LEED certification and designing and building an energy efficient building. Those two things are not mutually exclusive from one another. And I think and Ryan can probably speak to this better than I can, but when you look at the amount of effort that has gone into designing the most energy efficient wall section possible, and the number of discussions and meetings we've had, while still answering the charge of creating a flexible space. It's David's comment about LED, it's all of those things. So we're trying to, as a team, create the lowest first cost building we can, while balancing it with creating the lowest life cycle cost building we can. And we all know that's a healthy tension, and you will make trade-offs along the way. But I think there's a lot of really good dialogue and a lot of intelligent people weighing in on that to make sure that we're making the best decisions we can. And that's what we need to continue to do, is have those kind of discussions. And that becomes part of value engineering. Ultimately, there will be value engineering discussions that say, we can lower the first cost today, but we have a responsibility to all of you to explain what an operating cost impact might be for doing that. Or it might be simply, hey, I can come up with something for the corridors that's cheap on day one, but it's a bear to maintain, and it's not going to hold up, and you're not going to be happy about it. So that's maybe not a good decision. We probably need to spend a little more there and save it somewhere else. That's one level of value engineering that we will talk about and we will go to, where I think having the best budget direction we can get right now or soon from the board is where it gets more interesting, is when the value engineering becomes programmatic value engineering. When we can no longer get to the budget by changing the floor tile or changing the light fixtures. We now have to make classrooms smaller or have less of them, or those are a lot harder decisions in my experience in conversations than do we want, high-end ceiling tiles or mid-grade ceiling tiles. Nobody knows the difference anyways. Let's have that discussion. So that's where I think if we can get as much direction as possible, then we will work to hopefully, in a nirvana world, show up and estimate this building and find out we're at your desired budget to begin with, and we don't have to have these discussions. That's probably not likely. We're going to have, and the question is, how deep do we have to go? How deep do you have to cut to get there, if you will? So that's, I don't know if that helps relative to.
Okay. Did you want to talk about the constructability of insulated concrete forms versus, the impact? And I'll just say, if we were tasked with designing the most energy efficient building you can, we would design it the way we are. We still wouldn't use, we're getting a better insulated wall value with the system we've designed than we would if we were using insulated concrete forms. So, and that's just a fact. So if the cost is the same and we're providing a higher performing wall system, and it's easier constructability, you have more competition, which is going to lower your price. There were a bunch of issues.
That's more my comment, is just there is because it is a product that is not as widely adopted, you then have a smaller pool. When you're going to build a building of this size and scale, even in traditional methods, even in steel frame, even in masonry, the list of competent providers gets smaller. You know, there are people that can go put up a 2,000 square foot masonry building. They are not the same people that can build a 155,000 square foot masonry building. That is a smaller group of tried and tested and capable providers. But in the more traditional methods, we are able to create greater competition in a tight market. And that's part of this thing. I mean, this is still estimates, the GMP is still an estimate. A huge part of our, as Shoke's value proposition, and quite frankly, this whole team, is to figure out how to get the market excited about this project and have them on board so when it is time to bid it, we get a very strong effort from every capable provider that we can get. Because all you need is one. You need one mason that really wants the job. You need one electrician that really wants the job, but is capable. One of the concerns that I have, and I've built an ICF building, and I think I can speak to the positives and the negatives, is to do that on this scale, you're going to have a very limited group of contractors that have that ability, none of which are local. Quite frankly, none of which are in the state of Ohio. So we're going to be bringing folks in, very likely from Wisconsin, Kentucky, elsewhere. That presents its own set of challenges as the construction manager in terms of managing a traveling workforce. Can it be done? Yes. Is it optimal? No. Would I prefer it? No. I'd rather be able to work with, you know, local steel contractors, local masonry contractors, local metal panel contractors that we have relationships with, that we have history with and track record. I would feel better about that for the board.
So the comment I would make is I think by and large the process has unfolded in an organic way, and it has worked, you know, fairly well. I think, you know, as we're going through this, you know, we're constrained as a board because we only meet once a month unless we throw extra meetings in, and, you know, so you can't, you know, you've got that whole dynamic where it's got to be public meetings, got to notice and all that other stuff. So when we're going through this process and ideas are brought forward, like solar, you know, I think the approach has been, okay, that's fine, let's take a look at it until there's a showstopper. And if there's a showstopper, or if there's a majority of the board that says, no, we don't want to do that, then we move forward. And that's what we did on solar. We hit a showstopper. We talked about lead. Okay, well, that's fine. Let's look at lead. But, oh, my gosh, that's going to be a lot more cost. Okay, let's move forward. I think this is the same thing with ICF now, too, which is, okay, no harm in looking at it, but do we have showstoppers? You know, and so I'm hearing some of these things like there's very little use of that in schools in Northeast Ohio, you know, some of the challenges with construction, also our timeline. So I'm gleaning from this that there's showstoppers here that, you know, if we wanted to keep pursuing ICFs, you know, that there's going to be impact potentially, cost, schedule, whatnot. Is that
Very much so, yes.
I don't see an issue, at least to me, that there's not been a school in Cuyahoga County that's been built with ICF when there's other schools in northern Ohio that have. The thing that makes the difference to me is what you said regarding a better insulation value with the steel framing than you can get with ICF. If it's the same cost and we get a better bang for our buck, I think that's what we need.
And I think, you know, even recognizing that our goal is to do the best thing we can for you. So if you can outline, you know, I thought we had some of those priorities going, and like I said, we looked at the lead. We've got the list for you today. We'll distribute it before we leave. Actually, we can do it now just in case you have questions about it while we're sitting here. I'm sure I'll pass.
Helps me get a couple more steps in. So,
I had no role in the preparation, so.
So is it like, if you tell us, design is the best building that we can, that creates a flexible environment, that is the best, most well-insulated building, which is going to be the most LEED environmentally friendly building, we would design the system like we are right now.
One thing, I think, Mark, and I'm not going to suggest that I'm the most capable person to answer this question, David, quite frankly. so there's a question of, to your point, of board engagement, we meet once a month, and how do we, and that's probably a process that we should talk about, or David, if you have some best practices, because I do think, you know, we have our working meetings, our core meetings, where a lot of the heavy lifting gets done. And what I have found in my experience is, and this is hard to do from a schedule standpoint, but typically if a board, over and above the administration, if the board has a person that's willing and able to be designated as kind of the facilities person throughout design, or sometimes preferably two people, but to have a consistent voice rather than, and it's no, but if you're able to come 1 month, you know, Mark and then Kathy, you come a month, and then Mike, you come, you know, that's hard too in terms of consistency of feedback and that loop. So that might be, David, talking.
No, it's, different boards operate differently. I have Westlake building about 150,000 square foot elementary school. They identified one board member who's come to every core team meeting and been to every construction meeting, so the board has complete continuity. And then in that instance, the board president, who has changed, I guess we're on our third board president only because of the annual flow of it, the board president attends as well. So they have 2 board members there, but one in particular has been there from, remember that conversation when we were talking about cutting trees down 2 years ago? He's still that same board member that's been to every single meeting, and there's been continuity, and it's his charge to make sure the other 3 board members know, hey, these are the, and we still come to board meetings, there's a monthly update at each board meeting, but there's that one person who's got continuity and explains to the board members, these are the issues that they're grappling right now, so there's no huge surprises.
And we're working through that process. We've come, you know, a little farther in that. As far as consistency, we still have to talk about that if we just want that to be one. And, you know, the important thing is to understand when the board member comes to those meetings, they're going to talk. And so not to feel, for lack of better words, you know, like threatened or that you're being given direction as much as this person has gone through and gotten feedback from board members, and that's their opportunity to do that. Because when we first started, we had the direction that was making people feel uncomfortable. And so we want that engagement. That's our opportunity. So we can talk about that consistency, but we also have to understand that board members coming, that's this board's opportunity to weigh in on some of the things that we've, you know, gotten from feedback weekly, and, you know, and not to feel like that's like a, you know, an uncomfortable situation, more as a communication situation. At least that was my okay. So we'll get our act together as far as that and talk amongst ourselves. Right now, we do have somebody actively coming, getting feedback from the board, and coming back to the board as well.
I want to just make the point, and I am not an expert in LEED by any stretch of the imagination. LEED changed about 2 years ago fairly dramatically. We went from version 3 to version 4. You know, that doesn't mean the building does not have everything that buildings 2 years ago had. It is very hard, and I mentioned.
I think Chris mentioned it would be LEED 3 certified, but not 4, because the bar keeps moving. So I think we have 2 things that we need to tie up here. One is we talked about potentially meeting next week with Chris before our public forum so that the board can maybe see if we can settle on a number to get better direction. And then I think we also need to close the loop on ICF, which is, are we at a place where the board wants to offer direction one way or the other, which is, no, let's not pursue it anymore, or yes, keep pursuing it?
No.
Well, I actually have a couple questions and comments before we get there. I guess my understanding is the reason there's not more schools in Ohio that are using ICF is because unions during the recession asked the governor not to.
Not true.
They might well have, but I have yet to see the unions have any sway over Republican administrations over the last.
No. This was back when Strickland was the governor. So
it might have been, but over the last, since we've had Republicans for at least, I guess, 8 years, Kasich Ray.
Yeah.
Right, it happened during the recession, but that's
Yeah, but
besides
most of
the
that
point.
recession was under, well, it doesn't, I mean, I understand the point. I don't think that's why it isn't in the design manual. The OFC, most schools build according to the Ohio Facilities Construction Manual, Ohio School Design Manual. That was developed back in 2000 under a Republican administration that was Taft at the time. It's been amended periodically. I don't think it was union influence that drove that option out, because we have a lot of school buildings that have been done without the OFCC's involvement, where people can do whatever they want, like this project.
Okay.
We're not restrained to the design manual. It's a good default because it has been vetted. It has a relatively good track record, and it has been highly vetted.
Okay. I'd like to know, and you don't need to tell me today, but in the next few days, I want to know numbers. Like, it's not that helpful to me for you to say, we can't do LEED certification because of this. I'd like to know how you calculated the fact that the energy costs with me, and I don't need to know every little thing, but I'd just like some backup for knowing why the masonry steel costs, the energy costs are going to be less with masonry and steel on a going forward basis than the ICF. So for me personally, I'd like that information.
I don't think we're able to do that. I mean, it's just like an impossible task.
Well, then how are you able to say that you know the energy costs are going to be less with masonry and steel than they are with ICF?
Because we know the insulation value of both systems. That's a different issue than applying cost to a hypothetical situation.
Okay, so what are the insulation values then that's my...
What's the R value of our system right now? R28.
Okay.
And the insulation value of the ICF?
R25.
R25.
Okay, all right, that's what, I need backup. And then
See,
I guess...
think this is the part where I would hope that the board would trust us as professionals.
Well, a couple things had happened where, like at the core meeting in March, you told me no schools in Ohio used ICF. Well, that wasn't
No, I
correct.
said we had never done a school pilot using ICF.
Okay. Well, I guess my other point, with all due respect, David, we are being told today that we need to like give, you know, more guidance, and you're offering suggestions as to how to, you know, not get to impasses like this. We're relying on you to tell us the best way to move this project forward. So is there anything that you would suggest to us today that we haven't been doing? I realize you used Westlake as an example, and we appreciate that. Is there anything else that you think we should be doing so that we don't get to this point again?
The biggest item is if there's a budget number that the board wants the elementary school cannot exceed, give us that number, because we can then work with it. We went the other way. We took the direction from the board to be, we want to make sure the elementary school is appropriately, this is going to be somewhat, it's not like if we spend 39 million, the building's terrible, and if we spend 40.6, it's phenomenal. We went the other way. We established a budget for the elementary school that we thought made sense given what's gone on around in Berea's Elementary and Westlake's Elementary and the North Royalton Elementary, all of which are relatively large buildings. And we said, those schools came in at X, we're going to be 2 years beyond them. We think our school's going to cost Y based upon the team. And we were working to that number. If we want to work it the other way, where you say, we need to be at 39, 40, 30.5, whatever that number is, because we want X for the middle school, high school, that we need to get, if we can get that information, we can then generate options for you.
Okay. And then just as long as we have at least one board member at all the core meetings going forward, you think that's a good way to handle this?
I think it's very helpful if it's the same person, because conversations carry on from month to month, week to week, throughout the process. And I understand that's hard. We might need to change the time that we need from, I don't know, is it 9 o'clock or, you know, we might need to flip that to a different time.
Is there flexibility with that, the time that?
We all work for you. So we will.
So that's been a constraint for us because we
But-
work some during the day, so it's only limited us to certain people.
Sure, but, you know, tell us what you need. If you need us to meet at 7 o'clock at night
Okay.
every other
I
Wednesday,
think
we'll make that work.
I think that's a to-do for us as the board, to see, can we identify and agree on one board member that will consistently be there, and an additional board member as available and as interest presents.
Yep.
And then based on whoever that board member is, if there's a request to maybe change it from a morning meeting to an afternoon meeting or whatever, then we can work with the team to figure out what does that look like.
But right now, the next core meeting is next Thursday morning.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so to Mark's point, are we putting to bed these ICF blocks? I mean, is that what I'm hearing, or are we putting this on hold still?
Well, we have to, the board needs to make a decision. I think
Okay.
Mike was.
Mike said,
Oh,
Well, not, you can't give a better R value if it's already designed. Why would we even consider changing it? It just makes no sense.
I mean, I think I've heard enough that I would not support continuing down the ICF path, that we pivot and move ahead.
Ellen, how do you feel about this?
If your R numbers are correct, and I hope they are, then I'm okay with, I mean, I'm gonna accede to these guys.
Okay, is that direction?
If I may, on the 10th, do you want to hold a work session before the public session at
Yes.
7?
Yes.
The next
Okay, and
question.
what do you want I'll point to them because they're the ones who are actually going to do it. What do you want us to present to you at that meeting? Do you want some options on?
Well, I guess,
Where we think we
I
can
guess
save
it was-
money?
I think that this is more internal for us, I think.
Yeah, I don't think you guys need that work session. You need
I
to sit
would-
with Chris.
We need
Yeah.
to talk with Bruce.
I would think that if we come up with a number, right, and that would be the goal of that work session, come up with a number. So if we give you a number saying, don't go over $40 million, that once you do all the value engineering and whatnot, that if you got to a place where it's like, the only way we could hit that is we gotta do something you probably don't want to do, you gotta come back to us and say, okay.
Okay, so to your point, but you're coming to the public engagement meeting after the work session. Okay, and what I would expect, it's a simple recap again, a presentation, another opportunity for our community to weigh in and feel part of the process. That's what we're looking for.
Sure.
There have been concerns. And so allowing those people the opportunity, whether it be through me, because they've written to me, or, to come to the meeting to share their concerns. We are not so far ahead that we can't do something about it. And even though I understand we're moving forward still, if it's enough of a concern, we're going to address it. And so that's what next week is about, and the work session is separate, as you understand.
Sure, so would you like us to finish off the design development package and move forward?
I mean, that's my right? Am I?
That's good. That's how you're going to get the best,
I
you're
understand.
going to get the best information if we take it to a logical next end of the chapter, for lack of a better phrase. Get an estimate done, and instead of fighting about the numbers that we know are inaccurate now, you'll get more accurate data, and we can solve for X better.
And here's one of the main concerns. The initial meetings that you had, I forget, the steering, what was it called, the facilities committee. There seems to be a concern that things were misinterpreted. And so that's what next week's about is, what does flexibility mean? What did that mean? Did that mean the footprint flexibility, ability to build on? Did that mean open classrooms? I think there are some people who want to clarify, and if not, I have, they've written me asking for, wanting me to clarify that for you. Because we keep referring back to that, facility committee, and we want to make sure that their voices are heard as well, okay?
There's, some of these topics can be sensitive, right? I mean, you're consolidating buildings,
Correct.
so.
And I don't want to have next week's discussion today.
Okay.
I just want to I want to make sure we're all on the same page. That's what we're doing at this work session. So you're not showing up next week surprised. I want to make sure I personally give you the message of what the expectation is of that meeting. And this board, the majority of us, felt very strongly that we want to make sure, now that we're still in the beginning phase of the process, that the public and everybody had the opportunity to say something.
Could I ask one quick question? For the meeting next week, are there visuals or anything that you think would be beneficial or helpful for
No,
the
I
discussion?
thought that 3D, as long as it works and doesn't.
Yeah, what you showed
it was
last
good.
time.
Basically bring the SD presentation.
Yeah,
Right.
just a recap of here's where we're at, here's what it is. It may be a very short meeting, I don't know.
Okay.
But it's just, we're providing the opportunity, to
Yep.
get some of these things out in public. And, we can say to our public then, we've addressed them, and you had another opportunity to weigh in. And that's really a good place to be. And then we'll feel better about moving forward where we're at, okay?
Happy to do that.
Okay. Anything else?
That's the.
The tip. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, sure, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
We have, yes, we have a secondary item, which is
I'm going to invite the folks from DiGeronimo and companies? It's singular though, right? Oh, company. You guys can take the mic, and if you need me to be Vanna White and hold something, I'll gladly do that, but we're going to let them speak.
Jack of all trades tonight. It's good, David. I'll tell you.
Floor is yours.
So let me just ask you before we start, let's all assume that we know nothing about what a TIF
I was gonna ask you,
is.
that was my
Okay,
first-
just
that
a
was my
base
introduction.
level for our public, so you can explain this to all of us.
I do, and I tend to get in front of these a little nervous, especially now with the camera on, I might get passed out, so. I want to be respectful of the other agenda items too, so if at some point if you just want to cut me off, cut me off. My name is Kevin, I'm a principal of DiGeronimo Companies. My colleagues, Abbas Hassan, our Director of Development, Brent Leslie, our CFO. Abbas is formerly with Forest City, I name drop just because I'm sure some people are familiar, and Brent is formerly of the Port Authority of Cleveland. DiGeronimo Companies are a group of companies based locally here in Independence. We have several offices throughout the country, but are headquartered in the Cleveland area. We are mostly based in construction. My grandfather and uncle started Independence Excavating 60 some odd years ago. And over the years, we've assembled a different group of companies for different trades of work. Today, I'm representing our development entity, DiGeronimo Development, to talk about and introduce very briefly the Valor Acres property, which we are the named developer in, and in partnership with the City of Brecksville and the Brecksville CIC. So I assume you'd like maybe a little history of the property, a little bit generally background on it, or
Okay, yes,
that'd be helpful?
that'd be great. Thank
So
you.
the property that we've called, renamed Valor Acres, is formerly the VA hospital. The now 10-year vacant piece of property, part of the consolidation that was done, where it brought the hospital down to main campus in east side of Cleveland. Property has been sitting vacant for about 10 years. We've been there recently. Since October, we've been working on asbestos abatement. And as recently as this month, last 3 weeks ago, we started actually demolition. So if you've seen, we're probably now third buildings being demoed. So in 2018, we signed an MOU early part of 2018 with Brecksville and signed a formal development agreement to represent the property, part of which we agreed to take down and take care of all the environmental liabilities and demolition. We are very excited about what this could potentially be. If I'm being very brief, because I don't want to take up too much time, I'll give you a chance to ask any questions you might have. This is a really, really unique opportunity. We specialize in real estate, among other things. I should have given some more background. A couple of recent projects you might know of. We're a co-developer on Pinecrest, east side of Orange Village. We are co-developer on Cornerstone Business Park, the industrial redevelopment of the former Chrysler plant in Twinsburg, and a university market in Berea in partnership with Ball Walsh University on Front Street. Those are just a few of our projects that are more recent if you want to look up some of our past work. By comparison, this is an extremely unique opportunity that we're really excited about. Geographically, it's a great location. Obviously, I should have mentioned too, I'm a 10-year Brecksville resident, my kids are very close to joining the school system. So we started this 15 years ago, pricing out the demo, it's just a contractor. And everyone has been really interested in the site for a long time, but it was under the control of VA. They could never get it freed up. So Brecksville lost approximately $2 million of income taxes, never had property taxes because it was a public institution. And that's the current state it is right now. It is not currently generating any real estate taxes for the schools or the city, and obviously no income tax. We are really focused on delivering the best high-end use that we can here. And I'm going to go back to that because that's why a TIF is required, to do the best use, best capability. It helps bridge some gaps, which we can technically get into if you want.
So what exactly is a TIF?
That's where I'm going to bring in Brent to give you a
Okay.
little more formal. One of his main responsibilities at the port was to process a lot of TIF.
At its highest level, I think, I would just think of a TIF as property taxes that are generated on the site that are then spent on associated infrastructure on the site. So instead of when you pay your taxes and it goes into the county treasury and it goes out that way, the taxes that are generated within a TIF district are paid to the county, but then they're cycled back in to related infrastructure on the site. So it's a way to sort of target your infrastructure investments. And so it's a commonly used practice in larger scale developments. It's up to each city and each school district how it goes, but we sort of in our process took a look at some of the more successful developments across the state in successful school districts and cities. Crocker Park in Westlake, Pinecrest in Orange Village, Bridge Park Square in Dublin, the Green in Beaver Creek, Ohio, and Market in Maine and New Albany, all cities very similar to Brecksville, and the one common denominator across all of them for their large-scale developments were in taxing financing. So that is, at its highest level, is what a TIF and how a TIF functions. I know that the concept, it hasn't been utilized that often, if at all, in the city of Brecksville's history, but there's also hasn't been a 100-acre ground-up development in the city as well. So hopefully that's a good enough tutorial, but happy to we could spend an hour on.
No, so we have a property not generating any income currently. And so a TIF would then incentivize
Yes.
the property development, is that correct?
Correct. It helps offset the infrastructure costs associated
Okay.
with the development. So
So the
taxes-
district would want to consider and do something like this because,
it would help spur development, and there still would be tax revenues received by the school district. It just depends on how, there's a couple different legal agreements that are entered into, and it just becomes what that number is. And so,
And in short, it would greatly expedite the development process.
right,
So if you didn't have a TIF, you're going to see a build-to-suit sign and a whole different type of use, not looking anything like that.
okay.
This only gets done with a TIF.
I want to welcome everybody to the school board meeting. We have about 5 more minutes of our work session, and then we'll get to the wonderful recognition. But we're finishing up. They're talking about Valor Acres in Brecksville, the VA property, and we're talking about a possible TIF, a tax incentive for that property. So this is DiGeronimo Company, and they are presenting to us. So we'll be about 5 more minutes, and it's good information. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, the biggest point is it greatly expedites our deal, which is with the city of Brecksville, which is public and public record. We have
Just to clarify, the land value goes on the duplicate as if it's at the regular taxation value. So once the land moves from the city to the private developer, it goes on the duplicate, the tax rolls for its fair market value, and they pay full tax on that. The TIF applies to any additional improvements to the land value. So, and it's limited to any of the public infrastructure, parking garages, sewer lines, utilities, roads, all those things that eventually become public amenities. So it's not like the developer puts the money in their pocket. They have to build a public, something that will benefit the public, and that ultimately goes to the city
Right.
as part of their property.
So maybe I could dive into a few questions with the proposal that we were sent. And the proposal is, you could even bring it up.
Yes, okay.
It's out on board docs for anybody interested in looking at it. So when I'm looking at the back end, it's, phase one, tax generation from the land. I think that's what, David, you were just referring to. That's coming in. Can you go to the last page, Jeff?
I will.
You got to scroll over to the right.
The gray button
Yeah.
on the.
Yeah. Oops. Yeah, right there. So the tax generation on the land, that's 56,000, okay, and then when it says the future tax revenues under TIF proposal, 350. So does that, so the request was for the TIF to be 100% at 30 years?
It was 75, 25, which means that the school district would get 25% of that incremental value of the growth. And so that would generate.
That's what the 407 represents.
That's what the 407,000 represents. Once it goes on the duplicate, it's going to start generating, once we acquire the property from the Brecksville CIC, it's privately owned. It's not part of the TIF.
What we were trying to separating them real quick was to
Right.
show you that immediately if a TIF passes, the land now becomes eligible to pay its taxes.
Okay.
So that's just the land, unimproved. Then as the improvements come on, then we split the phases just to show you how it would functionally work. It's 350 for the improvements, and add those two together, that would be a theoretical phase one.
Yeah, Mark, if they don't do anything, I mean, and they acquire the property in 2020, okay, calendar year 2020, we start collecting for taxes in 19 if it happens in 19, correct? I mean, that's just the 56 if nothing's done.
Right.
But the, kind of like the,
Let me just correct part of that.
please, please.
Right now, the current deal is that we have a 15-year development deal with the city. The city actually holds the title of the land in the CIC. So during that course, that 15-year duration, if we do not transact or develop, there will be no tax generation.
Okay.
So it's actually zero.
Great.
If we were trying to kind of just show you that the escalation happens really quickly, because even on this year, theoretically, you could start incurring taxable income. And then, obviously, as the improvements go, that's where it jumps to the 350, and you add those together.
Thank you.
Mark, do you have other questions?
So the 407,000, you don't know when that will start?
I think that's a great question. I think when we were saying annual, when the development if we got the TIF and we're able to build phase one, that's its annual, that should be its annual return. You wouldn't get it right away because it'll take some time to build out the full development, but stabilize.
It's
Also 3 years out?
It's 24 months to build this phase one. So that's when, that completion is when it would be eligible for tax. It would still be, you pay the next year, but, you pay your last year's taxes in reverse.
Okay.
Yes, 24 months from when we start break ground.
Okay.
So if I'm understanding right, then we get, if phase one's finished, we get $407,000 a year.
That's estimated, right? It's conceptual, but yes.
Roughly.
Yes.
Which is about a quarter of what the value, the tax that we would normally get without the TIF.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
One of the things that challenged me when I was working through some of the math, and in fact, we met with the team here to kind of make sure we understood the math, is that 116 represents a total cost. So that has soft costs in it and hard costs. That isn't what's going to go, that isn't the fair market value when they're done constructing, because all the county auditor would assess is the actual, what's there. They don't care what you spend on your architect or anything else. They just look and say, you got a new building. So the assumption they have used to generate the 350 is they have assumed 70% of the investment will be the fair market value, against which your effective rate gets multiplied to get to the 350. So I think it winds up being 82 million and then approximately 27. There's another sheet that shows the math.
Yeah.
Sorry, 81.2 and then 28.4. 28.4 is what goes on the tax rolls when they're done building everything, if it goes as planned.
Anything else from the board? Mike, did you have something?
And their request is to also cover phase 2, and you don't have a real, do you have a deal with the city for phase 2 already?
We do. We have
But the city will control whether they get that land based upon how phase 1 goes.
In a way, and I guess that the importance of both phase 1 and the entire property is that, you know, it is just phase 1. It is the ignition to the rest of the development.
Right.
If you go to, you know, anywhere for these corporate headquarters, which would be ideal for the site of some sort, or a campus of some sort for corporate, they would love to see a phase 1 in here. In the way we've designed it or something similar.
Right.
So this is big picture too. We tried to estimate that, but that's a very conceptual future, and we don't like to overestimate, but it's serious. It's a very, very large amount.
Well, we appreciate your time. You did very well. Thank you very much. And it's very helpful to our public to understand. And this will be helpful when we make our decision. So thank you very much.
Thank you
That's
for your
pretty
time.
fine.
Thanks, guys, appreciate it.
I'll see you in a week.
All right. Thank you for waiting. That concludes our work session. We have item 4. We have recognition and presentation, the reason why we're all here in the first place. So let's move forward with that. Mrs. Magyar.
Thank you.
Do you need some help, Joelle?
No, we have to do here, so that'll be fine. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to see a packed house, and one of the reasons we have a packed house is because we have amazing kids who have done some amazing things this year, and we want to make sure that we honor all of them. We have so many this winter that we had to split them into 2 groups, so we're recognizing about 80 to 90 kids today and probably another 100 at our meeting in April. So I want to congratulate all of you for just all of your amazing accomplishments and a variety of different activities. It's not just athletics, but robotics and music. We have very talented students here in our district, and we want to make sure that we recognize all of them. But I'm going to need some help to do this, so I'm going to start with our gymnastics team. I'm going to ask Maria and Joan to come up here, please. So as you know, our gymnastics team has won the state championship now in gymnastics 16 years in a row. We have some very talented girls, and we don't see that pool of talent diminishing anytime soon. So we're looking forward to 17, 18, 19, and 20 too, right? And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Joan, my beautiful aunt, is turned in her letter of resignation and is going to be retiring as our gymnastics coach. And I just want to...
And I'm not leaving.
I just want to thank you for all you've done for us, the program. It wouldn't be this program without you and Ron, and we're going to miss you greatly.
I would like to say on behalf of the board, Mrs. Ganem, you have just been such an amazing leader in this community, and I want to thank you. It makes some of us very sad, but you need to enjoy yourself and retire, and I know you won't, but I can't think of a better job for Brecksville than you and your husband, so thank you.
I just need to move on a little bit, especially now that Ron's passed on, and I have a 94-year-old mother right now that
Oh, yeah.
as soon as I'm done here, I have to say goodbye, because she's at my house. But thank
Well,
you so much.
thank you. You've just been such an asset. Thank you.
So we'll call the girls up, and then, do you want to say what? All right, let's start with, she won state champion as an individual. She was a co-captain, and she's a senior. Izzy Captain. Izzy Captain. Izzy Captain. Izzy Abakar. Such a long walk. Here, go see Mrs. Mary. There you go. we have co-captain Kaden Stopar. Here, Marina Hearns. Come on, Marina. Is Bella here or no? Bella Robotin's at her lacrosse game. Abby, bring her up and then I'll introduce you. Sorry. The one on top is Marina's.
Okay.
Jenny Bohorjak. A lot of people had track meets and lacrosse. Felicia Balaji, not here. Oh, she is here. Sophomore Caitlin Denby. Sophomore Kylie Kosick.
Caitlin was sectional ball champion and also second on ball in the state, as well as fifth all around.
Sophomore Sienna Trifero. And then sophomore CJ Watson. And sophomore Abby Williamson. And then on to our freshman, Jenny Bansu. Erin Delahunty, also an individual qualifier. Erin also placed third on the uneven bars as an individual. Balance beam. I just went to my first core cryotherapy session, and I'm a little excited still. It was so cool. Minji Howell. Freshman Lindsay Kern. Lindsay's an individual qualifier in all around and a few events also for state day. Emily Mixter, is that it? And Julia Oh, I said, sorry, Julia Salas. All right.
Great job.
All right. Can my mom say one more thing? Yeah. Let me take this. Smile.
Ready? One more. Nagara, why don't you get in the picture?
Oh, I do. Hi, Mara.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay. No, I got two. Don't. Two.
I just want to say thank you to everybody, the Board of Education, our superintendent, for the support we have gotten. I mean, I've been doing this since 1969, and over the years, I've gotten lots of support. I know sometimes maybe people question things, but we've always done it for the kids, and we've had wonderful, wonderful children come to the program. And as you can see, they're not only gymnasts, we put a lot of time there, but there are other athletes as well. So thank you very much, Min, for all the recognition.
Yeah, I
Thanks, John.
So just a quick comment for everybody. We are video recording this meeting in an effort to try to be even more transparent. We use Board Docs, which is a web-based meeting management tool. So everything that we're going over, attachments are all out there. We're going to attempt to use video, and you can publish the video out there, and it's indexed to agenda items. So if you just want to see this presentation and not relive the whole meeting, you should be able to jump right to that section. So we're going to give that a try, so those who are here, if you want to relive this moment, hopefully you'll be able to online.
All right, thank you. So on to our next group of fabulous athletes. I'd like to bring up our state qualifying wrestling team. We're going to honor some of our wrestlers, and I'd like to welcome Coach Dave Kazar up to the stand. Did I say it right? Did I say it right? Did I say your last name? Okay, good. Perfect. If you want to read the names and talk to them, then I can pass out. Oh, do you need that? I'll figure it out. Okay.
Okay, the 2018-19 season was another successful one for the high school wrestling team. The team finished ranked as the 28th ranked team in the whole United States. This season we were conference champions, sectional champions, district champions, regional team champion, and finished 4th in the state as a team. We were also one of the only 21 teams in Ohio to be named All-Academic Ohio. So this year's team was highlighted by 8 state qualifiers. They are 132-pound sophomore James Bronstrup, who is also Academic All-Ohio. All right, 160-pound sophomore state qualifier Anthony Rizzo. Anthony was also Academic All-Ohio. £138 senior, 4-time state qualifier, 3-time state place winner Marco Regalbuto. Marco became just the 4th 4-time state qualifier in school history. He has state finishes of 3rd, 5th, and 6th in his career. He finished his career with 3rd most wins in school history with 139. 113-pound senior 2-time state qualifier, 2-time state place winner Jack Stanley. He had finished 4th and 5th place in the state the past 2 years. He finished career number 9 all-time in school history with 120 career wins. So next, junior 126-pound, 3-time state qualifier, 2-time state place winner Jimmy Carmody. Jimmy took 4th in the state twice the past 2 years. He'll be back next year. 152-pound sophomore, 2-time state qualifier, 2-time state place winner Victor Voinovich. Victor finished as state champion and 3rd in the state so far in his career. Victor was also named Academic All-Ohio. 182-pound sophomore Ben Benadia. He was state runner-up this year. He also earned All-American honors by finishing 3rd in the nation at the NHSCA National Tournament last weekend. And finally, junior 195-pounder Ethan Hatcher. He's a 3-time state qualifier, finished 3rd place in the state this year, was named Academic All-Ohio, and also at the NHSCA tournament this weekend, he's won a national championship. Okay, thank you.
Oh, take one picture now.
Quit laughing, no laughing. There we go, thank you.
Okay, next, Craig Kovacs, if you want to come up with your group who are getting ready to travel to Worlds. We've had several of our kids qualify for Worlds in robotics, so.
Come on up, guys.
All right, so.
We're good.
I have stuff for them, so. Might start on the other page.
This year, our teams, Brecksville, we're known as Team 2011, and then each of our teams has a number, so it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We qualified 5 teams for the World Championships this year, which happens to be the most any teams qualified in the entire world. So, we did pretty good. In our tournament, you pick in a line, so you have a partner, and 2 of our teams, they picked each other, and they won the state title. That's Team F and Team C. You guys can just raise your hand. Mike Wilson, he's on Team C. Their team, I'm going to actually just say all of the members. Mike Wilson, Marcus Masich, Leah Greismer, Dominic Policarpo, and Alex Wong. That's Team C. The top overall team is they won the Excellence Award, and that was the best team in the state of Ohio. They also won the state title. Team 2011F. 2011F. Zach Tribus, Luke Bazin, Nate Tribus, Ben Bazin, and Ben Nicholas. They won the state title. They were the number 2 seed overall. Team C was the number 1 seed. And I know some of you may have seen the video on Twitter. Some of you, I sent it out to everybody, but the end of the video was pretty awesome. The guys knew who won, and they set down their controllers, and they went nuts. Some may have thought that was the best part of the whole tournament, but what happens behind the scenes and how they all come together. We have one team, Team A, that they were 1 point last year from qualifying, and this year they qualified. When they qualified, everybody jumped on them, and it was probably that was for me the best thing. It was an awesome team. Team A, let's see here, we'll go straight to you guys then. Jackson Travers. See here? Okay, sit. All right. Adam Fliss, Jasper Jones, Matt Lawyer, Alex Reichert. That's Team A. Team B, you guys won the Create Award at the state tournament. It's an awesome award. There's about 5 awards that are handed out, and they were one that won it. Shahil Merchant, Jaden Daniello, Hunter Lewicki, Augie Thomas, Matt McNeil, Miko Nokovic, and Andrew Fliss. And did I forget anybody? I believe I got everybody. All right, thank you.
Like double or triple.
Team D who?
Team D who? Run it, take a knee. I thought you were
I have one team, I forgot. I'm sorry. When I said, did I name everybody, they said yes, and then I forgot a team. Team D, Matt Kirkanich, Nick Battaglia, Frank Farron, Aiden Casa, and Aurora Thomas.
Can you tell us for a second, so how long have we had a robotics team? How long is this?
So this is our 5th year competing. Our first year we had 4 students. Second year we had 9. Then it went to 21. Then we've been 40 plus each year.
You have just gotten more and more successful. How many times have you been to nationals?
So the World Championships, Ohio is actually, we're the third largest with all teams combined. There's 24,000 teams in the world. 2 of our teams happen to be ranked in the top 10 right now in the world. So, and in a couple weeks here, you know, we've always been, you know, kind of proud to get to the Worlds, and I think a lot of it has, their attitude has changed a lot to where Worlds just, they're going there to compete, and they know that they can compete with the best of the best. You know, when we say Worlds, it's truly, we go against China, Mexico, Australia, you name it, they're all there. It's neat because we all play the same game, yet you get to see how China decided to play that game and how Australia did and how our kids decided to play the game, and it's strategy and everything else, and you're competing against them, so it's pretty amazing.
So you have been the coach since the beginning, is that correct?
Yeah.
So you have built this from the ground up, is that correct?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So, we want to tell you, you have made this district so proud, and it's so amazing what you've done, and we want to tell you that it has not gone unnoticed, and thank you very much. You've all made us so proud, so thank you. So this includes, this.
No, we have, I think, Aaron, Rex?
So there's even more at the ladies' meeting? What? There's even more students getting them?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Once I can make it tonight.
All right, so I was going to read what you wrote, but you can read it. Sure. Huge, like you have this, like,
Listen, wait.
So are these
Yeah, those are all of them.
Okay, well, so we'll
220.
okay, that's fine.
All right, as is the case with many of our student groups, we have awesome kids are involved in everything, and with the magnitude and size of the band program, kids are at volleyball tonight, they're at musical, they're at track, they're at lacrosse. It's really cool, so they're everywhere. So I'm thankful that these students are able to join us tonight. The Wind Ensemble went to the Ohio Music Education Association large group adjudicated event back the second week of March, I believe it was. And this is a event, it was at Mentor High School, and bands from all over Northeast Ohio were there. And what happens is they perform 3 prepared selections for a total of 4 different adjudicators, and they give us essentially a rating on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the highest. And the Wind Ensemble received the highest level rating from all 4 judges, which overall gave us a score of a superior rating. And there were one of 2 bands all weekend that received that highest level, essentially perfect score from all the adjudicators. So there's 51 total students in the ensemble, so I don't think we're going to be able to go through and name every single one, but we do have certificates for all of them, and we'll pass them out. Well, I can go through all the names.
You can go through the names.
Sure.
There you go.
Let's practice my pronunciation.
We're being recorded, go on. And
Yeah, okay. So they are Olivia Armstrong, Jenny Bahorzak, Noah Brown, Miriam Churchin, Foster Sereno, Catherine Dubkowski, Lauren Danella, Jack Falco, Julia Fader, Andrew Fliss, AJ Galucci, Sean Gauntner, Matt Hiltz, Dan Hiltz, Susie Horish, Elise Horvath, Rachel Jacob, Logan Kaminsky, Eleni Karakostas, Nate Canarum, Abby Kovach, Hannah Lee, Jared Leuthauser, Parker Lewis, Cameron Mays, Corey Mays, Luke Miller, Molly Molina, David Nowaki, AJ Orlando, Nicole Ortenzi, Garrett Pachorek, Stephen Pilot,
Zach Ravinani, Sam Rosselo, Oliver Saab, Emma Sack, Joe Sarfi, Destiny Schiff, Kate Schwen, Evan Shaheen, Maddie Shaheen, Julia Soltis, Gwen Still, Jocelyn Trout, Savannah Euler, Bartek Wardega, Maria Weber, Nikki Weedland, Kevin Williams, Kat Wise, and Jake Zywell.
All right, picture.
Get in.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, great job.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you. Yes, here's all your tips.
I can meet you out in the hallway. You can pass them out, or you.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Got it, please.
Wow. Are we amazing or what? I tell you, we're at the best. All right, so I want to thank you for coming, and obviously this is what makes our district great is this, and our parents make our district great, so thank you so much. And you are welcome to stay, but you're also welcome to leave because it's a school night, and you're all exhausted, I'm sure, so thank you very much for coming.
So.
Honey, thank you for being a good friend. Thank you. No.
I heard that name. I said,
No, not the same.
what are you taking?
They're to put on the back of your cell phone to hold a card in, honey. But would you like a pen? Your mother wants to have a pen. I don't think you have a cell phone yet, but you would need that.
I have an iPod.
You do?
Does that count?
Do you have a library card?
Yeah.
Then you can put your library card in that, so you can take one of those two. Put it on your iPod. You're welcome.
Thank you for being proactive, Mr. Code. There we go.
Good evening.
Yeah, we're ready.
We have Doug Palmer with us this evening.
Okay, so let me say, we have item 5, other board business. We have ODE, transportation presentation and ballot schedule, B, cell phone stipend discussion, and C, tennis court update discussion. So thank you, Mr. Code. Item A.
So we have Doug Palmer with us this evening. He is going to provide an updated report on transportation services. And with that, I am going to just turn it over to Doug.
It's a pleasure to be here tonight and address the board. Thank you very much for the opportunity. OSBA was retained to review 4 items for your school district. The estimated routing impact to move students to the middle school and to the elementary routes, to review the estimated need for additional buses to accommodate additional students on the middle school and elementary tiers, forecast economic impact of eliminating the central routes and additional routes to the middle school and elementary tiers, and 4th, to review the traffic patterns at the middle school, high school complex. First one is to review the estimated routing impacts. Currently, the district transports 408 students to the central campus on 20 buses. This is from district data that has been provided to us. The plan calls for students in the 5th grade to be relocated to the middle school building and students in the 4th grade to be relocated to the district elementary buildings. The district currently operates on a 4-tier routing plan, with central tier being the 3rd tier in the 4-tier system. The displacements of those students in the middle school on the 2nd tier and the elementary students in the 4th tier impacts on the total routing structure of the district, and we can immediately eliminate those 20 trips on that central tier, which decreases the direct operating expenses for those vehicles. The 5th grade students will be picked up on the existing middle school routes, and the 4th grade students will be picked up on the appropriate elementary school routes. Both the middle school and elementary school routes have to be evaluated to determine if there's sufficient seating space available for those additional students, and it is reasonable to assume that some of these students will require new or additional bus stops for that are not currently scheduled. The net impact is some of the routes will become slightly longer, both due to the additional students and the additional stops. We considered the seating capacity to determine if additional buses will be needed to meet those assigned programs, and there is a logistical trade-off between seating capacity and time constraints. Those are the two things that buses operate against: seating capacity or time constraints. You're normally faced with one or the other. It takes so long to fill a bus, or you have a limited number of time, and so you need to put more buses on the routes to haul the number of students. You have to divide that work out. With unlimited time constraints, we can increase the carrying capacity of the existing buses, thereby limiting the need to schedule additional buses into the fleet. So a longer time between buildings allows the buses to fully utilize the capacity that that bus has, reduces the number of buses you need for that shift or that tier. Conversely, if routing time is limited, capacity of the bus is limited to the time that you have to run the routes. You need more buses to haul the same number of students. We reviewed the estimated need for additional buses to accommodate the additional students on the middle school and elementary tiers. The first requirement of this is to evaluate the ridership of the newly configured 4th and 5th grades. Transportation staff here was great. They gave us numbers. They also gave us an expected forecast. Along with the expected forecast, there was an expectation that the daycare or the latchkey program may be eliminated for some of the grades. That might increase ridership. So we went with an 81% of the eligible students in those grades as bus riders. We actually went above that a little bit. We went up to 250 riders for each grade. The 81% was 221 for 4th graders, 234 for 5th graders. So we increased that a little bit to make sure that we are looking at capturing all of the seats needed or all of the time needed. So the data indicate that a slightly higher projected ridership is than what is that current? The slightly higher projected ridership than currently at Central, but is in with expectations and reasonable assessments. Currently, there are 711 students riding on 27 buses, which averages 27 students per bus. Routes range from 20 minutes to 40 minutes in length, both in the morning and the afternoon. The current ridership is low compared with vehicle capacity. Again, you're limited by time, so that's reasonable. The majority of the buses used by the district are 71 passengers. That's a 71 passenger, there's 3 elementary students in each seat. So really you have a realistic capacity of 47 students on a bus, 2 to a seat. That's what's realistic. For more effective use of the buses, ultimately reduce the transportation cost. The routing goal should be to increase the ridership on the buses with introduction of additional riders into this tier. So with these new riders at these schools, we're trying to get more riders per bus. The mitigating factor will be the amount of route time that is available. That's what's going to limit Rexville. If no bell time changes are made, or the middle school routes move as much as 15 minutes later in the day, there are no obvious time conflicts that would preclude the district from operating the buses more efficiently. If we maintain the current ridership of 26 students, we'll need to add 10 buses to this route time. If we use a more realistic goal of putting 35 students on a bus, we can transport this new total group of riders with 29 buses, which is only 2 more than currently scheduled. Or a third option is we can add 6 buses to this tier, which then averages 30 riders per bus. And that's what those options show, are the number of buses and then the riders per bus. Again, with each amount of time is going to be the constraint for this district. It's not going to be the bus capacity, it's going to be routing time. There are currently 3 elementary schools with a total ridership of 777 students on 22 buses. That averages 35 students per bus. Each elementary school is a little different. Highland has 27 riders per bus, Hilton has 41, and Chippewa has 35. So there's a little bit of a difference in each school district, in each school. We have 221 new riders between these schools, and assuming that there's a proportional distribution of those students, I'm sure that that's going to be looked at very closely by the district to determine, but you have some flex there. We would need an additional 6 buses. If we increase the ridership per bus, again, we can decrease the number of buses that are needed on that trip. A typical routing goal for elementary students is 45 passengers per bus. They're smaller. That's what's typical. That would require 22 buses to haul that group of students, that new group of students with the 4th graders added to the elementary tier. If we had 1 vehicle for each building, that would be 3 trips in the afternoon, and that would achieve a ridership of 39 passengers per bus. So we're getting really close to that 45 target. Again, that chart is 777 riders, incoming 4th grades 221. So we have 998, 22 buses would be 45 per bus. 25 buses would give you 39 students per bus. Again, it's going to impact time. To get that many students on a bus, it's going to impact time. Forecast economic impact of eliminating the central routes and additional routes to the middle school and elementary tiers. Performing cost analysis of these changes is dependent upon both the number of trips that are added to each of the tiers, as well as the potential changes in the school bell schedules. To develop a cost basis, we use the data from the T1 and T2 transportation reports that were submitted by your district. So this is your cost. It's not a state average or anything. It's the cost that were reported by Brexville. The analysis report shows a total operating cost per bus of $60,063. When we evaluate the cost to add additional buses or to adjust tier assignments, the cost impact is less than the total cost. Support and overhead costs do not change in these adjustments. The operational cost to add an additional vehicle to the fleet is calculated at $52,261. So your overhead costs are your salaries for your mechanics, your secretaries, your building costs, and those stay constant no matter how many buses you have. So we're not adding that cost to the buses. That's why it's not $60,000, it's $52,000. Conversely, you don't save $60,000 if you take a bus out of the fleet, you save $52,000. Just wanted to make that clear. So looking at the tier costs, the cost of eliminating 1 trip from an existing bus route in the middle of the routes, so you won't impact labor, is $1,909 for that trip. That's what it's costing each bus, each trip is $1,909. That's not accounting for labor. That's your fuel, your maintenance repair, your tires, and some of your supplies that go on that bus that are used. There is no labor cost impact because the tier set is in the middle of the day. So the driver's going to start, they won't do that 3rd tier. They'll just do they'll do 3 tiers, but it'll be the same length of time. Likewise, adding a tier to a trip of an existing bus in that time frame would add $1,909 for that per bus. If all school times are left as currently scheduled, we consider 3 scenarios. Eliminate Tier 3, absorb 5th graders into the existing middle school routes, absorb the 4th graders into the elementary routes. This plan then saves 20 trips, each one of those buses making 1 trip. It adds no new trips and results in a net savings of $38,000, which is 20 times the $1,909. Eliminate Tier 3 and add 2 buses to the middle school routes to achieve a better ridership ratio and add 3 buses to the elementary routes to relieve the additional routing requirements to the new riders. Evaluating those fleet utilizations, there are already 2 unassigned buses available for the middle school shift, or the tier. And currently there are 7 unassigned buses available for the elementary shift. So no new vehicle needs to be added to the fleet. This plan saves 20 trips on the 3rd tier, but adds 5 more trips for those other 5 buses. So that ultimately results in a net savings of $28,635. The third option is eliminate Tier 3, add 6 buses to the middle school to minimize the impact on the ridership ratios, add 6 buses to elementary routes. This will require an additional 4 buses in the fleet because there's only 2 unassigned buses right now in the middle school. So you would have to add 4 buses to even that out. There's a net savings from the tier reduction of $22,908, but an additional operating cost of 4 new buses. That operating cost would cost the district $209,000. The net impact of the district offset the cost with the savings. Costs about $186,000 to put 4 buses on. If the district determines that it wants to adjust the bell times of the remaining buildings, it is necessary to consider the amount of time available routing on each tier. Currently the fleet is challenged with interval time between the high school and the middle school. This results in early drops-offs in the morning and late drop-offs at the middle school. By eliminating the current 3rd tier, there is a good opportunity to open up the bell schedule to provide appropriate routing times between each of the buildings, each of the remaining tiers. Effective routing will require that 40 minutes be considered the optimal spread between bell times. That's going to allow your buses to more fully utilize the capacity that they have. To make the routing changes identified in plans 1 and 2 without any additional cost. If the routing windows are reduced below the 40 minutes, a more thorough routing analysis will be required to assess the actual impact. So we looked at that impact of getting your students on the buses that you have. I spent an afternoon here. These were my observations. You probably know where your buses park. Your special ed buses park between the high school sidewalks. They circle around and leave past the parent pickup line. And then the other buses park from that front middle door on down and around the football stadium. The regular ed buses pass the special ed buses as they come in. The special ed buses are loading, they load first, and the regular education buses pass those buses and as they approach to where they need to park. They then exit around the tennis courts and out through the middle school parking lot. They go around the main green island down by the middle school and to the left and go out where the resource officer is then assisting traffic to get out on the road. Traffic light is dotted, it's in a flash mode, so he assists the traffic going out on Mill Street. What happens on Mill Street then is beyond your control. Traffic backs up, buses sit 10 to 12 minutes before they can reach Wallings or before they can reach that other road. It's just an effect of where you're at and where traffic is. In the afternoon, the middle school buses then they're late coming back, and some of the students have to wait for their buses to pull in. Middle school buses exit the same manner, and they get stuck in the traffic at the same place, out on Mill Street. Resource officer does a great job getting the lot cleared, but then they end up on the Mill Street in that traffic pattern. There are some districts that release students and parent traffic differently, and they put their buses out first. That's an option that maybe you would want to consider, maybe you don't want to consider, but that's an option that gets the buses in the front of the line out on Mill Street. That's as much control as we have over our fleet. The final operating cost sheets are what we reviewed in the presentation. Is there any questions that I can entertain now?
So the districts that do what you just spoke of, they release the buses first, how much time do they generally release the buses before they release the other traffic?
Well, it depends on the building itself. Your high school is very long. It takes your high school students longer to get to the buses. It's taking them about 8 to 9 minutes to get buses loaded to get ready to leave after the high school bell. So that would be that 8 to 9 minutes after the bell time before the students or the parents would be able to leave the lot also.
So I had a couple questions.
Sure.
So, we also have private schools that we have to address. And did your analysis take into account, the private schools? I know we do kind of a hub system with some of them where we bring them to one school, and then from there, a bus goes to the private school, and then another one, there's a dedicated bus run in the morning.
We didn't change the impact of the bus for any of the private schools or how the hub system works. That would still be in effect.
Okay. And there was some talk before about potentially considering going to smaller buses when we're ready to purchase more buses. Would there be any reason to go smaller than the 71 passenger bus we have now?
Not when time is the limiting factor. If you were in a district where you pulled up at an apartment complex and you filled that bus at one apartment complex, a smaller bus would hinder you. But I think your district is the time factor. So when you're talking about getting 45 kids on a bus, I mean, that's going to push your time limit.
So the suggestion, recommendation that, you have at least a 40-minute spread between bell times is an optimal situation. So, we're exploring different bell time schedules. So I'm assuming from this report, from your perspective, it would be to our advantage from a transportation standpoint economically to try to build in 40-minute spreads on all of our bell time options so that we could run our transportation as efficiently as possible.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. Jeff, maybe you could pull up page 10 of the report at the very bottom, because that summarizes the scenarios and the costs. Keep going. No, keep going down, yeah. Yeah.
There's what I went over in the main part of the report.
Right.
The 1909 per tier cost, your district cost of $52,260 was what you would spend or reduce if you take a bus, add a bus, or reduce a bus. The scenario one was keep the bus numbers consistent, no bell time changes, add 0 buses, delete 20 routes. That 20 buses is the 20 trips on your central school. And then your tier 4, you add 0 buses. That's what I talked about. Scenario 2, add appropriate buses, no bell time changes. That was adding 2 buses to the middle school and adding 1 bus each to the elementary tiers. You deleted 20 trips, but you added 5 more trips, 2 on the middle school, 2 in the elementary, or 3 in the elementary. And then tier number 3 was add 6 buses to the elementary and the middle school with no bell time changes, and that's where you add the extra buses.
So scenario 1 and 2, we do with our current fleet. We don't have to add any buses, and we'll get some modest cost savings from that.
Modest cost savings.
Because those are more efficient because you're loading your buses up more.
Right.
Whereas scenario 3 is it's for more service to the students because they don't have to be on the bus longer, but we would require 4 new buses and additional operating costs of about $186,000 a year.
Yeah. And that's the operating cost. That's not the purchasing cost
of the buses.
That's not the depreciation of those buses. That's not replacing those buses down the road. That's just operating. That's an operating cost.
Any more questions?
So, just more of a comment. So, we did not ask you, or maybe we did, and I know that we have given you some additional information. We came up with some 8 scenarios with bell schedules and said if we were going to work, verify that this is the number of buses that we would need to make this scenario work. I know that none of those scenarios had 40 minutes, and we can't have 40 minutes. And, in our talking to our transportation director, and, we've worked out some other doable solutions that might not be the 40 minutes. Part of our issue is, just so you remember, our student days are different at different levels. So it's almost virtually impossible to get that 40 minutes because you've got a 6.25 elementary day and a 7-hour student day. That's 45 minutes right there. Unless our union is willing to have the same student contact day, which they are willing to flex that a bit. I'm not quite sure the full 40 minutes, nor do I know if our parents at an elementary school would want their kids 7 hours. It's a very long day for little guys. We're not going to have that flexibility to be able to do those 40-minute intervals because we have to account for the less time that we have student contact time at the elementary school. So I just want to remind you of that as we're looking at these scenarios and coming up with these bell schedules that we gave to you to look at and see if our analysis is correct. Those are things that we feel we can work within the confines of our contracts and what we've negotiated in terms of student contact time. And so that analysis of what that is going to look, for us is going to be helpful to see if we can even attempt to change a bell time this year. The other thing is, when we get to the new elementary school and you take all those kids, ridership may increase because, some of the reasons why our parents choose to drive their kids to school now is because of the length of that bus ride. Well, what we've predicted to put more kids in the bus, but also have more buses so that we can shorten that time. So kind of do just the opposite of, put less kids in the bus to shorten the time, but we have more buses to do that. That analysis is what we need too, because if we come out in 2 years and say, okay, now we need 15 buses, we can rather do a purchasing plan where we do that purchasing over a few years as opposed to one lump sum. That's going to be beneficial information to our board as well.
So we have a secondary contract in place with your board. Now, to go deeper into the routing study, and what we evaluated in this study was the current process, the current work that had been done. We actually have a process to work, to delve into and bring up actual routing scenarios for your district. We didn't do that. What we looked at was what had been prepared for us and evaluated it and made the determinations on those figures that we were given. So we have a secondary contract that I think will answer and provide a lot of options and a lot of insight for you as a board to make those decisions.
All right. And the other question that came up from one of our parents that I said that we would talk about here, and I would love your opinion before I asked Chris to actually speak about it. We've had some issues where, we've had several issues this year, unfortunately, where cars are passing buses. And so some districts have gone to putting cameras on the outsides of buses to capture that. And, we've talked to local police force of how that gets monitored and that kind of thing. But from a state perspective, how many districts would you say have implemented those outside cameras, and how effective have you found them from your perspective that they have been?
First of all, they're very effective because they capture not only the license plate, but the picture of the person driving the vehicle. Mm-hmm. What we're limited right now with, though, is that prosecutors will not use that evidence to prosecute because of the red light camera law that was passed in the state. That camera falls into that as a prosecution tool. So right now, we have been working with our state legislators to eliminate that for buses. But it is a very, very optimal tool to use. We're actually in the middle. We're actually just finishing up a bus passing survey. And if I may speak to that for just a second, we've had 175 districts report the bus passings. We've had over 1,400 bus passings in a single day out of those 174 districts. 4,000 drivers have reported over 1,400 bus passings in a day. If you do the math, that's over 1 million a year in Ohio. That's just Ohio. So we are working with the state legislators to try to assist that.
How does that work with communities where we service we have two municipalities? So, the bus cap, how much more is that on our drivers, or did most of these companies hire a third party to kind of monitor that? Because how much is it on our drivers to remember, oh, I was in Broadview Heights when this happened, so now I have to send this to Broadview Heights, or oh, I was in Brexville, because our buses cross city lines. So what's been your experience with that?
It's a lot of those systems actually have a GPS in them. And so when that goes off, that camera sets it sets the location on the road where that happens.
Okay.
So it's actually very, very good tool to use for law enforcement when they're allowed to use it.
Mm-hmm.
What we're trying to do is try to take the pressure off of the driver to catch the license plate and the driver. I mean, my gosh, that driver's first responsibility is to the student. And that's what they focus on. And if your community, we've had a lot of communities where it's the community members that report the driver and the license plate number back to the school. And that's the community effort that needs to happen, along with the enforcement and the cameras. I mean, if we had that, I think we could reduce that.
Okay. All right. I know that, Chris, we are looking at getting a couple here to do a demo on some of our buses to try them out, so we're pretty excited about that. But just while you were here, we're going to take advantage and ask you about it.
Absolutely. Glad to answer anything I know about.
Well, the only comment I would make back, Joel, to your earlier comment about, constraints with contracts. I mean, when we first dove into this, we were told it was very difficult to try to change the start time of high school. And I think this is a time of change. We're offlining one school. We have opportunity to kind of revisit everything. So I would say let's not say, well, we can't do a 40-minute spread because of contracts. That contracts could be a showstopper, but let's not take it off the table saying, well, we can't look at 40-minute spreads because there's contract language. Well, maybe we should take a look at that and see what makes the most sense educationally, economically, and brainstorm on that and reach out. And if there needs to be conversations, have conversations. And if there's showstoppers, there's showstoppers. But I wouldn't want to arbitrarily say we can't do 40-minute spreads without really exploring and pushing to see, can we do this? Because there's a lot there that makes sense.
So the 8 bell schedules that we came up with was in collaboration with the teachers, agreeing to, possibly increase the day, but not the full 7 hours. And what I'm saying is that we're not taking it off the table. What we're saying in our conversations, that's the recommendation that's coming from the state, 40 minutes. We may not need 40 minutes. We're looking more at 30. And is 30 doable? And are those scenarios that I shared with you, they are 30 minutes. And that was in collaboration. So certainly I don't mean for you to mistake what I was saying. I'm not saying we're not having conversations, we're not taking it off the table. What we're saying is we may not need 40 minutes, it may be 30 minutes. And those are the scenarios we came up with based on our conversations locally and with the union.
Right, but when you had those conversations, you didn't know that the recommendation was going to be a 40-minute spread.
We didn't know that.
So what I'm saying is now we have more information. So, the effort that went into the bell schedules, it's all great, but now this is a journey, and we're learning more as we go around. When we first started down this path, we were told we need 6 buses and we were going to have tremendous cost increase, on transportation when Central offline. Okay, well now we're saying, well, we got 2 options where we can service with our current fleet and have some cost savings. So, this is a journey we're going through. It's like, okay, well, let's challenge things, let's ask things, let's get more information, let's get some outside advice, outside counsel, and then see where we go. So, yeah, I think, from my perspective anyway, this is an iterative process. So we're learning more as we go through, and, let's keep it open as a greenfield of what's possible.
What we'll do with your district staff when we do the options is we will actually use your afternoon dismissal times for your spreads on your route times and make up that difference in length of educational day and move that to the morning. So if you have a 6.5-hour day for your elementary school and that gets out at 2:30, then we look at, well, what time can we start the next school? Or what order should those schools be in? Because what we're not proposing is lengthening or shortening any school days. What happens then is that extra half an hour is built into layovers or in the morning routes. So the drivers have a little bit of layover time, or that's when That's when the staff can do your parochial schools, or that's where the flexibility comes in. But without delving into a complete route study, we weren't able to provide that information tonight. But that's what we will be working towards, is actually narrowing that down and showing you what times the bells will need to happen in the morning to give you the right length of day for each school. It sounds kind of funny that you plan your routing schedules off of your afternoon, but that's when you need every seat when the kids get out of school. In the morning, you're able to start earlier or later depending on where that route is and adjust your route time. But in the afternoon, that's a hard stop. The kids come out, you need the buses back there for the next seats.
You know, and you brought up, we're looking for creative solutions. So one of them was what you said, maybe the bus leaves before, you know, maybe you gain minutes or lose, you know, that transportation time. So if that marries with maybe flipping things,
Right.
you know, that we're open to change. At
And
least,
that's what we will do. We will work with your staff, with your direction, we will work with your staff and provide those options for you to look at. I mean, we're not telling you how to run it, we're just giving you ways to look at it, of how to make those adjustments, and how to make those changes.
so time-wise, how long for that second contract that we've held you to?
We're working, some of our work has already been done, so we're working on that. It's usually a 4 or 5 week process to get through that. You don't think it should be that long, but it takes a long time to look at something and bounce it off of your staff to make sure there's not a gap. And that's something that we have missed here. Everything comes back for review, and then we look at it and adjust it and work more into each bell or each schedule, each school on each shift. And it takes a little bit of a time, it takes a little bit of a collaborative effort between your staff and us. So.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, just to be clear, so are these schedule options, but new bell schedule options, what they're going to look at to do the analysis on?
We will look at all of those things that you've given us,
Okay.
and probably come up with some of our own. I mean, the options can almost become unlimited, you know, but we kind of try to limit it to 5 or 6 to have you have a good idea of what's available. So.
And you know, this conversation started in the hopes that maybe with the high school, that we can have them not start as early, and we're just looking for incremental change, and with the idea that we can be creative. You know, I know Mr. Ziegler had brought up the same thing you did about releasing at different times, but that the hope is to get some relief at that high school level, as I think a lot of schools are looking at in Ohio, and that's what we would hope that you can help us.
We have done that for quite a few districts of what schools do you want to start at what time, and then you can look at how that affects their educational day.
So in 2.5 years, we have a new school coming online, and that's going to put a lot of changes too. So is that something that you can also, you know, do another run at about options for that?
Absolutely. We can. I mean, that's once we have the information, it's just logistics. It's just where is that school going to be? What's it going to take to get to and from that school?
Sure.
What will be your expectations on traffic on the road? I mean, we come in and study things, but it's the local knowledge that perfects it actually.
So,
I have one question for Doug, and I think it's really on behalf of the board. Can you just please, in some detail, explain the difference between either scenario 1 and scenario 2, or scenario 2 and scenario 3? Please provide some detailed explanation of the difference between the two scenarios. Pick two that are close together and provide that detail.
Sure. If you go back to scenario 2, where you're eliminating those 20 trips out of the central school, you currently have 2 buses that are unassigned middle school routes right now. They have an open slot. So they do a high school slot, they don't do a middle school slot, they do a central and then an elementary slot. due to the time constraints or the complex routing system that's in place for your district. So what we're saying is those two buses then become usable buses on that middle school route. So we're putting those two buses back on that middle school route. In the afternoon, you have 7 buses that don't do an elementary tier route. They end after central school. They do a high school route and then a central school route, or high school, middle school, central route, but they don't do an afternoon elementary tier. We're suggesting extending that time or putting those buses into service for that tier. Number 1 is not putting any of those buses in, but that's when you have to have a longer route time because you're saying every seat has to be filled before that bus comes to school loaded. And every bus has to be filled when it leaves because you're at the maximum. And so that makes for longer route times. And that's where we went to that 40-minute, putting more buses into service on tiers to try to spread the load out over more buses, lower that time.
So I'm still struggling with, if we can't get out of the high school for 15 minutes, can't get out onto the road, and we're stuck on the road for 10 to 15 minutes, and we have 30 minutes between our bell times, between the high school and the middle school, how we facilitate that transport.
Well, that's part of the 40 minutes is the time that you're delayed.
So what you're saying then is we can run 10-minute routes, which then we need a whole lot more buses.
That's correct, Chris. Yeah, the more buses you put in service, fewer stops they have to make, the quicker they can make the turnaround. It's just like going to the grocery store. You go in for one item, you go in the grocery store a lot quicker than you can go into the whole carport.
So I had a really protracted conversation with Pete Friday, and I'm struggling with obviously how to do it, because we can't do it now, and you're saying we can't.
What we're saying is that you're going to have the same problems that you have now if you go with scenario 1.
And I understand that. So that, as long as we're all aware that if we maintain what we're doing, there's no change. And the charge from the board to us was to improve service. And so our goal then was to improve service. This is a rework of, we have some difficulties in transportation now as far as some limitations with the two schools.
Yeah, I'm not sure if our charge was to improve service. I think the biggest charge on the bell times was, can we start high school later and be creative in that area? I mean, the board's got to weigh in, but obviously out of the 3 scenarios, there's not much skin in the game to jump down to scenario 2 and add some extra capacity we already have, right? We're actually still saving money. It's just you're putting some more buses in and you're relieving that scenario 1 that has everything all full. So
that's what the routing study, the next step will be with Chris and your transportation supervisor. That's where we're going to get into the nuts and bolts and really have, it'll really be obvious, I think, much more obvious.
So how much, from a lead time standpoint, because you said that your next thing, you're going to take 4 or 5 weeks or whatever, and we're getting towards the end of this school year, when do we need to lock this in for next school year? Do we know?
Did you say July?
Well, routing
No,
should
that
be
was-
done by the end of July, and routing generally takes about 3 months. And that's using routes you already have, so.
But don't we need to let the teachers know what time they're going to be starting next year? Like, when do we need to do that?
Sooner than later.
Okay.
Are we also talking about how many buses we're going to buy this year? And what's the lead time on those buses?
120 days.
What was that?
120 days from when we need them is what, May?
If we were going to buy buses through the bid program, we would need to get board approval here in April, and they 120 days out for delivery. Now, we were sidebarring earlier to see if we can do better than that, and we weren't able to finish our conversation. So, because I understand we need some more flexibility.
But I mean, even a worst-case scenario, scenario 2 doesn't require us to purchase any more buses. So there are scenarios out there that would allow us, if the clock runs out on us, on trying to explore, right? And we know that in 2.5 years, we're going to open a new school, so we're going to get another crack at this. This is in our last shot. You know, and actually the new school is going to change things too, because that's going to change some of the dynamics and some of the variables in the equation. So,
But scenario 2 says we don't change any.
The only
Everything's the
way
same.
you don't have to add new buses, remember, if you change the times, we've got a whole pile of parochial kids and private kids.
Well, that's
You
what I'm
know.
saying. Scenario
Okay,
2 says
So
no time
this looks great, but then when you have to be careful with that time, because we're not talking one bus, we're talking probably 2 per school.
But again,
time.
scenario
So
2 as it stands,
That's another 6 buses, so that, we're talking, you know, that's something you have to really be very careful of.
but scenario 2 says there's no time change anyway.
Right.
are you saying that some of this, you're skeptical that some of this is
No,
accurate? or-
I think he's done a very good job. But I have to make it clear that when everybody is looking at this, because what we really want is to get kids to school safely and on time and prepared to learn, no matter what time that is. And Doug did an excellent job, digesting what we had, what he had in front of him in a very short period of time. I was very pleased. But when you look at this, there's a human tendency to want to make a tweak. And remember, a tweak is a paradigm shift in transportation. So you've got to remember that.
That's what we will be working on, that route study, with your local knowledge of how much does this change something else. And that's why it takes a little bit of time. Doesn't happen overnight. It would be great if we could plug these things into a computer and it would analyze everything and spit it out and it would be perfect. But routing doesn't happen that way. There are certain days you can't turn left on a road with a school bus, and there are some days you can. So that's what a local knowledge is very, very important.
Well, Doug, and you can see we're up against the time crunch here,
Yeah.
so, if you
We'll
can
be
work
working
with us
very-
as best you can, I think, the board's flexible in meeting whenever probably we need to meet if we got, hard deadlines to try to put some change in place, but we want to make sure that it's, everything's solid and we know exactly what we're
And
deciding.
Route 82 is starting to, this week, I can tell you, is starting to come out in full bloom.
Don't remind me.
And it was, I have to tell you something, that I was alone in the office, and it was nothing less than, you would have thought it was catastrophic, because everything, there was no predicting the times. Depended how long that flagger wanted to keep that group. And they're not showing us any deference whatsoever. So I'm amazed that they see a school bus and they say, let's make that thing wait. And they're letting 15 cars off of Glenwood Trail. Guess what that meant? Every bus was late.
Can we have conversations with our city's law enforcement to give some,
We have had several conversations with the city. We've even looked at options of moving the bus garage temporarily to a different location we've done all of that. We were assured at our last meeting that the city of Broadview Heights would have somebody there first thing in the morning at 6 a.m. and again at dismissal time at 2 when we get our buses out on the road, and let them all out before they let traffic go. So I will make a follow-up phone call and remind them of that conversation that we just had back in September when we reanalyzed all of what we needed to do. We looked at other options of even moving it out of that location to avoid that exact situation.
You did some very good forward work on that. I remember being involved in it, and you really did. But now that we're in it, and it's interesting because it's changing, and so you can't even predict.
So we need help from the city of Broadview Heights. Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So Joelle, to continue this conversation so we can be proactive, you've already had discussions with our union about these, is that correct? Let me
Yes, we
clarify.
had, so the discussion with the union really came up with looking at that student contact day. It wasn't looked upon favorably to increase it to the full 7 hours, nor do I, and we'd have to do some more work with our parents, because it's a very long day for an elementary student to be
Right.
engaged in instruction. They were willing to go up 15 minutes, which is what, was the minimum amount of time that we needed to increase that to a 6.5-hour day to build that time in between routes that we needed. And so that was the conversation ended there. So many of the scenarios that you see in the Bell schedule have taken into consideration that conversation that we would go to a 6.5-hour day. If you see some of those scenarios. Some of the scenarios we also have in there is flipping different buildings. So maybe it's the elementary starting first and then middle school or high school or vice versa. So we've tried to come up with many different options, realizing that of those 8, probably 3 of them aren't feasible just because of getting out too late, sports schedules and that kind of thing. But we wanted to be as proactive and provide as many options as possible.
So here's what we need you to do. We need you to have conversations that reach out to coaches and say, what is the latest that, you could leave? Because we are in a conference where everybody's 20 minutes away. I just had a conversation with the principal in Cuyahoga Falls, and they really wanted to do this. And they found feasible things, and they found that would work. But have those conversations. Make sure that would work. Start saying, what happens if we flipped? Like, start doing that due diligence for the board. Take it out to the PSO possibly. Have that, what would you think? Maybe we create a survey. Maybe we do something a little, what would you think? We're thinking about this. I think as they're working on this, we need to get the feedback, pick the options that are actually viable, that will work, and you decide that for us, and then let's send it out in a survey and see what the parents think, the teachers think, administrators think, and then we'll be able to come back and maybe, make a change if it's possible. Okay. Have I covered everything?
Well, yeah, I'm just curious, what are the constraints if, like if we were to flip the high school and the elementaries, right? Meaning the elementaries start earliest, the high school starts latest. What challenges are there with our staff to try to implement something? Because, some people are, personally, some people are going to be like, oh, I like it, or oh, I don't like it, but where are we at? Is there, I'm trying to remember, is there language in the contract that I didn't think there was that said it just
Defines
says
no
that the
day.
day is 7 hours. It doesn't define it starts here or it ends here, right?
It does.
It does have start and time?
Yes, so, that's why we would have to involve them in conversations with that. And then it doesn't say student day, teacher day. It defines teacher day, but then there's very definitive amounts of time that is non-interrupted time or uninterrupted time. So it kind of, because of all those definitions, it defines that student contact, if that makes sense.
But it doesn't define it as a specific start time and a specific end time?
We do have a specific start and end time in the contract. So that, and again, our union's willing to talk about those.
Okay.
They're not, there's no pushback on talking about looking at those times, as long as the context of the day stays the same. So, teachers are still working an 8-hour day, and, there's still the same 7-hour contact time at the middle school and at the high school, and then, they're willing to talk about that, going to that 6.5 versus a 6 point. So that's where that conversation has ended on, that front. But they've been very receptive to that, because we do have elementary teachers that would like to have their day start earlier. We have high school teachers that are saying, we're okay with our day, but we have parents that are not okay with the day. So middle school, some of the scenarios puts middle school getting out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That definitely cuts into the sports time, where, those particular teams, they play a lot less games. The instructional impact would be they might have to leave 30 minutes early from school and get out of class to make it to that sports, that sports competition. You've got some flexibility with high school because we end so early now.
Right.
There's a 2-hour lag before anything's happening, so it's plenty of time to get to wherever you need to go. But could we push that up a little bit? Of course we could. But then it impacts the other routes, and depending on where they fall. So we've looked at a lot of different scenarios, which is how we came with the 8 scenarios. And again, not all are ideal, but they're all something that could be done if with the analysis, with the routing and the buses, if we choose to do that.
Well, thank you. It is very helpful that this is the first time we've actually had something that is a possibility. And then, you know, very thankful that you brought somebody in to help us. We need to marry those two together, those two reports now, and then ask you to start having these conversations for us on our behalf. So with the possibility then that we can come back in May and maybe have a discussion, possibly, I don't know, a decision, it all depends.
Or maybe at the end of this month.
Maybe, but it sounds like it's gonna take about 5 weeks, so that's why I was thinking.
Hopefully less.
Yeah, hopefully. But if you could do that.
Absolutely.
And to our parents, hopefully we can have this all decided in our staff by May.
Well, and I would also say, obviously, you know, an eye on intermediate and an eye on the long term, right? So we may find that we run out of runway here to make something more substantial in terms of bell time changes, but we've done groundwork that could position us for when the new school opens to say, okay, well, all right, there's some receptive ideas here. You know, maybe we just wait for 2.5 years and pull the trigger when the new building opens.
Absolutely.
If I could, please, just address the board real quick. I thought Doug did a fine job going through the different scenarios. One of the situations in scenario one is that we run status quo. And today, what that means, and it was presented at the last board meeting, is that we have a number of buses that run late on a daily basis, not just in the mornings, but in the afternoons as well. My recommendation to the board stands from last month to effectuate even some improvement or minor change to the late buses that we have running morning and afternoon. I would still, you know, recommend that we add the five buses and try to work towards that decision as quickly as possible.
Well, and I think, Chris, you know, we appreciate all the work that you guys have done in the presentation last time. I think the good news is that we're not making a decision tonight. So
Yes, sir.
we're going back for more information, more vetting, right? Marry it to the bell schedules and see what comes back. And so the next time when we meet and we're ready to make a decision, that can be, you know, that might be the recommendation is we need to buy more buses.
Mark, the only reason I brought that up is that if we make a decision in May, we won't have buses in before the start of school. That's the only reason I throw that out.
Stay on Doug. Let's get it done
Because
earlier.
we will have a meeting specially for this, if that's, as soon as it's done, we will do that. And, you know, like I said, Joelle needs to have conversations as well, so, you know, the sooner she has those, the better as well.
We have PSO meeting tomorrow.
There you go, that's what Fred said, so
That's
there you
nice.
go. And like I said, I think the survey has worked out well when we wanted to float ideas, so I'm thinking work with Jim to create a survey and send that out as well. Yes, sorry.
Has the board decided whether or not GPS is an option for our parents?
No, we didn't decide that.
We haven't decided
No.
that.
How much lead time do you need for that to happen before
That should
next?
happen. We've been putting this forward, I know, I started the preparation in the fall to get this for the parents so that they would be able to find their bus online and also be able to use an app and track their bus.
Well, you also had the hopes that you wanted to train staff, is that correct? Is that you wanted to train staff on using it, or parent?
And Heidi's being very modest. The difficulty that Heidi's going to run into is if we are putting GPS on as a responsibility with her, at the same time that we're completely restructuring bell times and routes, that strain, her office is going to be underwater, so it'll be very difficult for her to push that amount of work across in a very short window, as well as, and again, we're very aggressively, and her top priority is getting bus drivers in there. We are struggling with that right now as well. So those things pretty much eat up her day and then some.
Okay, so here's what's happening. We have a board meeting in
3 weeks.
3 weeks? Okay. Well, right, but that's not what it's dedicated for, so 3 weeks. So we will put that on, and that will be, because we've had all these other decisions, we'll put that on as a topic, we'll have that discussion, and we'll make a decision. Am I incorrect? Could we do that?
Is that-
Yeah,
does
although
that give-
I think we already have all the information that we need. It was presented at the February meeting.
I mean, outside of the contract, after the fact, there doesn't need to be any board decision on that because it's less than the threshold of, you know, so that we could just go do it. So,
We don't need to do that?
So we could talk about it now and give
We
direction
could
if
talk
we
about
wanted
it
to.
now. So much for pushing it for 3
What was,
weeks.
it was like 30,000 a year, I'm trying to remember.
20, wasn't it 20?
Was it 30 to buy the hardware and
Yes.
20 a
So
year?
first year was 30, and then subsequent years was 20.
Well, I'll voice, yeah, Mike voices, I mean, I'll voice my opinion, which is, I think we should avoid all unnecessary spending right now. And in my view, it's a nice to have, but it's unnecessary. Not never do it, just postpone it for now, because this whole situation with the school being over budget and potentially the impact on permanent improvement with how much money we're gonna have left over to do, do the necessary repairs in the buildings. I'm not an advocate of taking on unnecessary costs, and it's a nice to have. I'm excited about it too. I really hope we can pull the trigger on it. My opinion is we don't do that now, we postpone.
So Chris, and I'm asking you to just say this. So 30,000 for the first, how many buses do we have? I forget.
We estimated that at 50 buses.
50 buses, so the total cost is, I don't remember what it was.
$28 per bus.
Yeah.
Is how you get to the 20,000 a year. And then there's installation costs that make up to the 30. Yes, ma'am.
And I'm sorry, this is and what fund does that come out of?
That would be permanent improvement, TTT.
It would, okay.
But that would be the same place that these new buses are coming from, right?
Yes, sir.
Which if we end up with 15 new buses, we don't have enough money in TTT right now to fund 15 new buses.
Well, Chris and Heidi, where do you, have you had many parents? I know I've had some people make the request to me, as you had many people make the request to you about the GPS.
On my end, it would be simply for the parents. It would do nothing for us, but it would give parents, it's called a geofence, and it's a 5-minute window. And then it would, on the website, that's why our website hasn't made any changes, because we wanted to do lead reveal with GPS at the same time. What a parent will be able to see is a real-time fluctuation in their bus stop time. Let's say they don't go for 2 weeks and they decide to ride the bus again. They go and they pull that up and they see what that time is. We don't have to reload the PDF, reload. So, and then it also has the parent access to their stop only. So they're not, worried about what their neighbor has or stuff. So.
I would recommend that we do it now because we know we're going to upset the system. We know we're going to have parents that are going to be mad as wet hens with the scheduling issues we're going to have. Giving them more tools to be able to know what's going on, I think, is a tremendous PR thing. This will have the community support us as we're going through all these changes. So,
Yeah, I think with the construction of 82 and buses being delayed, the more information we can give the parents, the better it is. I think the money's worth it.
Or an all-call. We don't even have an all-call, where if a bus is late, I can't say, hey, everybody on bus 21. And so for the parents in the audience, I want you to know, that would be dreamy for me, because nobody feels worse than I do when a parent doesn't know when their kid's coming home. I bet I feel as bad as they do. So, there's a few things technologically that would really make a difference. And I'm glad that parents can see that we care about what their experience with us is.
Which I have one, can you clarify the 30,000 is per bus?
No, it's $30,000 per, there you go.
There we
It's
go.
up there.
Bottom
It's
line.
at the very bottom.
Okay, so Mike,
yes.
Fred,
Yes.
yes.
Ellen,
I-
want to weigh
oh.
in for the record?
Yeah, no,
Just
I
wanna
will,
do a
and
vote?
I say yes.
Make it official? Can modify the agenda?
Well, we didn't need to vote on it, like Joelle said,
No.
we just kind
Okay,
of gave.
great.
direction.
There you go.
Okay, Mark, for the record, would you like to say?
No. Postpone. But that's
Okay,
fine.
so you have direction? Okay. All right, moving on. Item B, cell phone stipend discussion. So,
What's the recommendation?
yeah, let's talk this through and
Yeah.
explain to us how this, came about and.
So this conversation came about for, I guess it was twofold. As we were talking about purchasing these additional apps that were going to require our administrators to monitor outside of their workday, we had a conversation about the cell phone stipend. When we looked at it, we noticed that the cell phone stipend schedule was created in 2004. There's board policy to say that this should be reviewed annually with the board and then reapproved. In 2004, there wasn't a such thing as called a smartphone. It was simply a cell phone reimbursement. So it is at a cost of $23 a month that people were getting reimbursed. And it was arbitrarily created by a former business manager, and so there are certain positions that are getting more per their stipend amount depending on their job. And so when this came up and we looked at it and realized we hadn't reviewed it, we reviewed it and got some data from some other districts and realized that the cell phone stipend was very low comparatively to other districts. We also learned that some of our administrators are not taking the stipend because they were under the false impression that if they took the stipend, then their phones were not subject to public records laws. Our phones are subject to public records laws by our position, not by our device. And so whether it's my device or if the district is paying for it, if a parent wanted access to my text messages or access to emails on my phone, they are entitled to request those and have those. So we clarified that with our administrators, and then at the same time asked them to spend time out of their regular workday to monitor apps like the Stop It app. The Stop It app is something that parents can put on their phones, students can put on their phone, and they can anonymously report any type of bullying tips, or if they were struggling with any type of mental health issues, they can send it and it would go directly to a principal. So when we were talking to our principals about this, who are very excited about having this app, they asked the questions about liability, and not that the stipend will take away any liability, but is the stipend in line with the expectation that we will have for our administrators to monitor these apps outside of their workday? So we did some research, which you have different charts of different schools that have done different things, and we came up with this recommendation for you to consider. Brian, you looked at that, right?
I don't know if that's,
She just didn't move it. You want me to?
what's that?
This was in exec content, so it wasn't moved, so you want that up on the screen?
Yeah, that's the one that has the amounts at the back end. You don't need to rotate, just go down to the,
Those are the
bottom.
different districts.
Whoop.
Yeah.
I think that green chart was.
Policy.
One more, rotate. Yeah, so that's the current, and the page before is the suggested.
Here we go.
So part of putting it together was there was positions, if you look at an old one, that have been since eliminated, reductions in 2010. There's been positions that have been redesigned to fit the needs of the district. So try to pick a middle of the road number in between. Some districts are a lot higher, some districts are a lot lower. Tried to line up with districts close to us, Independence, Hudson, a couple other. Put a number in there. Try to figure out, who uses their cell phones probably the most. I think it goes back to one of the conversations that was had was basically, cell phone has now put us basically online 24/7. And so the question is, what do we want to do? What's our requirements? Like we said, the apps were coming through. I know a lot of my conversations happen on my cell phone, just because of the sheer fact the office phone and not being there or being out in the building or something. And I think I put mine somewhere in the middle of the pack. I think we talked about, like Chris Code does a lot with contractors and maintenance department things using his personal cell phone. So probably more so than anybody uses his cell phone in that. John Schenker, just from the sheer fact he's not a 260 employee, so during the summer, his guys contact him a lot because they have things going on in the summer. Even though he's not here, they need guidance from him. He uses his cell phone to get in contact with them. So ours probably, if I was to say anything, mirrors Hudson the closest, probably just a little bit below their cost. And then I tried to think of all the positions that we currently have, eliminated the ones that we had on our old one. Biggest thing is we had to review it, put something out there that we tried to give you a general idea, and really that's the purpose of it. So the discussion really comes down to what the board is comfortable with and go that direction.
So this conversation happened, Mike, I don't know, Mark didn't remember, about 6 years ago in Scott's, Mr. Provost's office. Do you remember
I
this?
remember talking about it, yeah.
Okay, so the conversation basically came around to the fact that we believe cell phones, well, some of us believed cell phones were just a standard item now, that everybody has them, that people are not compensated on most jobs for cell phone usage, and they're taking calls from clients continually. So why is this, I guess my question is, why is this profession any different than, say, other doctors don't get cell phone stipends?
Well, I
People
think-
in financial advisors don't get cell phone stipends. So I guess I want to understand that.
So part of it is really based off of our policy. We have a policy that states the stipend position that was board adopted and is currently in our policy, which is where the review came through, where, okay, so we do have this policy, so we have to address it. That was the purpose of this. If we decide to go back and change the policy, we always can do that. Policy committee always has the right to do that and adopt something different. I think in some of those scenarios, they maybe don't get a cell phone stipend per se. I know some districts, they give a certain, like they'll say $100 a month, we give you $100 a month to spend on cost. They don't call it a cell phone, they might say it's a technology thing, it might be a percentage of, they might give you a bump. The thing that we have to realize in this situation is we adopted a policy that's specific to cell phones. So if we want to step away from that, we can. That's not something that, that I had the ability to do, nor anybody else in the conversation. We kind of went by the policy and said, let's put the information together so that you guys can.
That's helpful. Did most districts have it as a policy? Is that what most districts had? For example, Hudson, North Royalton, did they have that as a policy?
Well, North Royalton, I believe, Jeff, they're zero, is that correct?
They're zero.
They're one of the districts that have zero. There is some districts that I talked to that are currently zero, and they're putting it back. Sometimes they were taken out because of reduction somewhere down the line.
Okay.
There's, like I said, there's some districts that give a certain amount just flat out in the contract. There's some that's negotiated into the contract. They give you a certain amount, so it doesn't matter if you want to use it on cell phone, you use it on cell phone. If you read some of the other surveys, they're actually, some people are given a monthly stipend and they're given a yearly amount, maybe every other year,
Like a
to
flat
purchase
amount?
new equipment. I just went by what our policy said. Our policy basically said there's.
Okay, so it's all over the place, is what you're saying? Okay.
It's all over the place.
Okay.
There isn't really a standard that you can look to and say, some are giving nothing, some are giving a lot, some are giving a little.
And some are giving district issued cell phones. They're actually buying a cell phone with the expectation that you use that cell phone, for any work related items.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, I had that in Canton, and I will tell you, I do not want to carry two cell phones.
Right.
But they required us to carry our work phone. And then, of course, they didn't want us to use our work phone for personal business, so.
Yeah.
No, I don't.
A lot of attorneys have, my cell phone's paid for through my employment.
Yeah, and I've never had a business experience where I didn't compensate my salespeople for.
Yeah. I'm just looking, at our teachers even. We use our cell phones a lot. We don't get any stipends. I understand. We're answering students all the time. And so.
Need a better union.
You know, I don't know, that,
Sorry.
some of this is, you know, where we're at today in 2019, cell phones are ubiquitous. Everybody has them, everybody has data plans. You know, some districts have nothing. You know, I know my company, you know, doesn't, you know, it depends on your level, but, you know, they used to compensate because I was on call, so they would compensate for that. But then it's like, no, now we're not going to do it anymore. It's just like, yeah, I'm still on call though, right? It could go off right now. So I don't know, I struggle with this because, you know, is this the best use of taxpayer dollars to reimburse for cell phones when everybody? I suspect if the board were to get rid of this policy, nobody would change their cell phone plan. You know, whatever the stipend is probably isn't really affecting people's individual choices on a cell phone plan.
But I don't think it's about necessarily, we're not reimbursing for data and for, you know, if there's an expectation that we are asking our employers in these positions to use their cell phone outside of their workday, that's where the stipend is coming in. It's not to say, you know, if I choose to use my cell phone during the day as opposed to my office phone, that's my choice, and I'm gonna, you know, I'll make that choice freely and never ask for a penny for that. But if there's an expectation that we're going to ask principals to monitor things, or we're going to ask our transportation director to be available because, you know, there's a field trip going on at night, or an athletic bus is coming home and there's an accident and there's an expectation that we've got to take care of it. It's the time outside of the workday that the stipends are looking to provide some, you know, additional compensation for time that they're doing work things outside of their workday.
And I'm respectful of that, but every profession, they have those expectations still, and they don't get cell phone stipends. Some do. It'd be nice, but we all don't get that. So
but I think that
I'm not sure I see the difference because I have a job. How lucky am I? And that's my job.
Well, these stipends weren't put in place when at a time because people had apps and were using data. I mean, these stipends were put in long. So you know, that could be an argument for why to continue it, but it's not the reason of the genesis of the stipends.
But partly a gesture of goodwill for the administrators in the district.
But I think, you know, there's fair labor standards laws that say that if, you know, for people who are working hourly, if they work overtime, you must pay them for that. And so, you know, just because our salaried employees are not, you know, subject to that per se because they're on salaries, doesn't mean that there shouldn't be some type of compensation for time that they're spending outside of their workday.
Okay, does anybody have any more questions? Any more information needed?
Okay. So is this something that the board should decide on, or we need to change the policy? Is that where this is?
Well, I mean, the board can decide to change the policy if you want. If this is something that you want to take a vote on, we can make an amendment to the current agenda and push it down into other board business or superintendent's business, and you can take a vote on it if you're going to take the recommendation.
So we'd have to take a vote on changing the policy, correct?
We have to decide what we want to change the policy to.
Right, that's what I mean,
So
but that's
your
what the vote's
Yes.
on.
So
Okay.
your options are, you
Got
can
it.
take this recommendation, push it into the agenda as an amendment, vote on this,
Okay.
or decide that you want to relook at the board policy, make some changes to the board policy, and then vote on that board policy change.
Okay. So, call the question. Ellen, what are your thoughts on what you would like to see done?
I am fine voting in favor of what was proposed.
Okay. Mr. Dozen?
I'm uncomfortable with those amounts. I'm not sure that we should be giving stipends, but I'm sensitive to the points that are brought up and sensitive of taking money out of people's pocket when it's already in their pocket. I would propose a lower amount. I would be more comfortable with a lower amount on these.
My thought is, I don't think we should be giving stipends.
I'll go with the proposal.
3 makes it done.
So that's 4. You, 3, okay. So then we need to adjust the policy and vote on it, is that correct? We need to have an amendment.
You gotta move it
Yeah,
down, right?
yeah, do you want to?
Adjust the agenda, change
Adjust the agenda, thank
The
you.
other item too, actually, if I may, that I would ask, I know right now it's a stipend, regardless of the amount, that's actually, included in the W-2 income of all administrators. It's not really, I mean, the districts I talked to, and I don't know if you did too, Brian, is a reimbursable expense, like a travel and entertainment expense. So I don't know how people feel about it being a part of their taxable income, because sometimes a reimbursable expense is not necessarily.
Jeff, I'm sorry, are you sure about that? Because I read through the policy this afternoon, and it said that it wasn't part of taxable income.
That's what the policy says. I checked with payroll today and said, Lori, are you sure? Yes, it's actually included in their W-2 income,
So are we,
I think
do we
that's
just need to
non-compliant
align
with
with
the
what the
policy.
policy
That's what I
is?
think. Yes,
Okay.
that's why I think if we're gonna change things, we need to.
Well, that sounds like, irregardless, it should come in line with the policy.
Something's gotta change, yeah,
Right.
absolutely. That's why I wanted to add that, because I think it's important that while we're at it, we make amends on a couple of fronts.
So why don't we just move this to the next meeting? Look at the policy and then vote on it? I mean, is there any reason why we can't wait for 3 weeks?
Because, also the policy hasn't been updated. Brian brought it to me and we were looking at it, and really, I don't think, since any of us have been in the district, it really hasn't been looked at since 14, so, I don't know, but.
Yeah, the policy was updated 14.
Right.
Okay.
I'm finding pieces everywhere of things that were done that I can't. My department didn't normally take care of it. I believe it was probably under Paul Sabasco, if that rings a bell with anybody. When this
That goes
was-
back.
Huh?
That goes back.
And I think that's when it was already put in place, and it just was, we can get it where we review it annually. We'll just put
Sure.
it in like a June board meeting or something, but there's actually supposed to be a form if you want to enroll in it. I can't find a form.
So we'll correct all
Yeah.
So do we need to clean up the policy language, Brian?
I think the policy is okay. I think like I said, these numbers that I put in was something that was close to the middle of the road. That's why I put them in there. If you decide not to change the policy, if you want to wait 3 weeks to reevaluate figures and go with new figures, that's totally your decision.
I don't know about waiting 3 weeks to change. I think that maybe just wait 3 weeks to vote on it, like put it in the policy, so we're gonna have an agenda item, so it's very transparent. It's an agenda item for updating the cell phone stipend policy, and here's the new draft of what we're gonna vote on, so everybody can see it, and then we just vote on it and adopt it.
Yeah, and also, Mark, it is a relatively small group of people. It's not like it's our entire staff. So I think we can correct the payroll item fairly, so just a couple of weeks. So
Right.
that'd be great.
Okay, so.
We can we'll clean it up, put it back in the agenda for people.
So, but I'm sorry, though, Brian, you talked about the form, which you can't find anymore. Is that language in the policy?
Well, it's referred to in the 2004 information that I found. I don't see it in our new, so I don't know if when we redid the policy in 2014, if we eliminated the form and it was just a straight out question. We asked some people whether or not they did the form. I think John Schenker said.
It's a locally created form. It was a form that was created because, again, people were given misinformation about public records. So if you wanted it, they wanted somebody to have a signature to say, okay, I agree to this. And so it's a local form. It's not needed. So it's not referred to in policy for that reason, because we created the local form.
Okay. Well, I would say clean up whatever needs to be cleaned up, and let's resubmit it.
And I think the other reason why that form might have been created is because it was part of payroll. So payroll needed a document saying you needed to add it to someone's taxable income. So if we move it out of that, it becomes a T&E, a travel and entertainment, and just simply.
I did see the language in the policy that talked about that those administrators who wanted the stipend needed to submit the superintendent like evidence of their cell phone bill.
Correct.
And so I don't know, do we still need that? I'm assuming that's not happening now. So we may want to, maybe revisit that whole policy and clean up the language and make it make sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I would definitely take it up, just one thing off Joelle's plate, and throw it into my office, especially if it becomes travel and entertainment type things. That's what I'm just speaking with other treasurers, and that's how they've done it. I think we're the only one that I've mentioned to them that actually it's a part of payroll. So again.
Okay. All right, thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
All right, tennis court update, item C, Mr. Code.
Would you like to give that update? Or is Joelle?
Sure.
Oh,
What?
Whoever.
Fill in my blanks.
Okay.
okay. Thank you, sorry, Joelle.
So, tennis court updates, this is a conversation that we've been having since the fall. This is not an easy or a solution that can happen quickly. Obviously, there's a large cost. When we had our architects actually look at the site, they gave us a cost to repair, actually to redo our current sites on that current location with a drainage system, and it was a pretty expensive cost. It was over about $570,000 if I remember correctly. So from that, we started to brainstorm other options to look at different ways that maybe we can look at new courts that might be a little bit less expensive. One of the options that we had talked about early on, which went south, was where is the best location on this particular campus to build new tennis courts? It would be where the current board office sits because it's the flattest location. And so we talked about that and moving the board office to some other site, which is still a viable option if we wanted to build new. And then we started talking to the city of Brecksville because as we said that we would look at other options for tennis courts, we said that we would repair our current tennis courts so that they are playable because there was a feeling that they were not playable in their current condition. Those repairs started in the fall. They were scheduled to then continue in the spring to make the last needed repairs and have them be done prior to the season starting. Unfortunately, weather has not cooperated with us this year, and those repairs were postponed. And they have been rescheduled, and they are currently being done. We, in the meantime, knew that we weren't going to have them done for the start of the season, and so we contacted the city of Brecksville. They have 3 courts there, and we said, are we able to use your courts for 3 weeks for the boys to have practice there for those 3 weeks from 3 to 5 every day? And they said, absolutely, we will do that. So they blocked off, they closed off their courts. They are ours exclusively for those 3 weeks. And we also moved their 3 first home games to away games, and we'll flip at the end of the season so that we still have the same number of home games. So that is what we've done to accommodate. We are still looking at other locations for tennis courts. We have an option of, I've talked to the city of Brecksville, of possibly building 2 additional courts down on the city property so that there would be 5 courts, which is what we need minimally to have our tennis matches. So we've looked at that, and we've had preliminary conversations with the city about constructing 2, which would be a far less significant cost than the $570,000 to rebuild them on our current site or to raise the board office and put them there. And it's a lot cheaper. It's about $90,000 a court, so about $180,000 versus $570,000. So that conversation is still happening too. They would be constructed currently where the softball field is at the city hall site. So part of that would be they can't lose the softball field. So can we provide another location for a softball field? So we're working through that. So we are still engaged in conversations. We still know that we have to make improvements to our current tennis courts or look for another option. It's still a conversation on the table. It's just not a quick conversation because there's a lot of dominoes that have to fall into place for us to come to a decision and be able to vet the best option for our team. So that's where we're at right now. We know that we said that we'd have these repairs done by spring. It was completely out of our control, and we're sorry for that. But we had made an alternative plan, which we shared and vetted with the coaches, and they were fine with the plan. They were appreciative of the fact that we were able to respond so quickly and make other arrangements so that it had the least amount of impact on the tennis teams.
Anything to add?
Just a question.
I think she did a great job.
I do too.
Was there a conversation with the city if we were to fund the building of 2 new courts, would they be willing to take over the maintenance of those courts?
We haven't gotten there yet, but it's part of that conversation with the baseball field too, because if they take over the tennis courts, we may have to maintain the baseball field if we locate it, because one of the locations we're looking at to put that baseball field, it will fit on the front of the elementary building. There's enough space there to relocate. So if that's going to be in our property, it might be a trade-off. We just haven't gotten there because we, are still vetting our options of where the best place would be and where the tennis courts would be. But it could be a shared use agreement, kind of what we're doing with some other projects.
Okay. Thank you for the update.
You're welcome.
Item 6, President's announcements. I do not have any. Item 7, community communication. We have A,
hearing of the public. So, does anyone wish to speak?
Consider other options moving the season?
Well, hold on, can you come on up here so we can hear you, Mr. Lee? And then if you would just state your name and your address, I appreciate it. Sorry, protocol.
That's okay. Jim Donnelly, 9508 Knights Way. Have you considered moving the season?
Considered moving the
Fall
season?
cycle?
The tennis season?
It's a conference decision. It wouldn't be something that we could just do on our own.
Okay. Have you had that discussion?
With the conference? Help me understand what the rationale would be for having that
Well,
conversation.
it's not with us, and we put a temporary fix for the last couple of weeks. You know, I'm guessing that the season will be moved before
The repairs are.
could get out of the sports in this season. So, like, do you have a backup plan? That doesn't matter.
The backup plan would be if they're deemed still not safe, I mean, we would talk to the conference about possibly changing all the games away if we needed to.
Okay.
So their season the kids would still play.
Okay. That's what I'm asking, whether or not there was a backup. So the conference would allow us to have our home matches away?
We can control that, so we can control within the conference whether the competitions are home or away. What we can't control is the season, so we can't say, well, we need to push tennis season to the fall now.
Right.
But we can control where the locations of those games are, and we do it quite often, especially for sports that are played outside, softball, baseball. Many times if the fields are not in the right conditions, we have to move the games to a different location.
Okay. That's one question, I guess. It's not an unusual arrangement for tennis courts to be shared among cities and school districts. I guess that's rather than like a pursuit.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's two courses of action. There's the intermediate, which is repair, right? Kind of keep putting Band-Aids on it, keeping it playable. And then what's the long-term solution? And that, we're trying to work on both.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to be heard? No? Okay. All right, item 8, board committee reports. We have the financial liaison audit committee. Anybody?
Oh, we had the audit back, whenever it was, I think we reported at the last meeting, right?
About a month, yeah,
Yeah.
a month ago.
So
Okay.
everything is good.
Everything's good. Permanent improvement committee.
I went to the core meeting on the 14th of March, and the next one is, as we all know, next Thursday, which who's supposed to go next, Fred?
Okay.
You know, on that topic, I could adjust my time. I'd like to try to go to that. Do we want to talk,
I think now's a good
about
time.
who do we want to, you know, designate, you know, a board member to try to go to all of them?
Right. So do we like the idea that came up that one consistent person goes to the meeting?
I do, except I just, who would that person be?
I would be willing to do that. If we could adjust the meeting times into the afternoon, it would be a lot easier for me to do
Well,
that.
you heard that they were open to that,
Right.
so that can happen.
Right, I mean, if the board is interested, I would be willing to be the designated person to attend all of them.
And, I mean, I'm interested in going to some of them, I just can't.
But you
always
can, and you
make it.
can, two
Right,
people
we
can
just
go,
need-
yeah.
Right.
Can I back up to the second individual
Okay.
if we want to do that?
We just have to make sure we communicate that there doesn't end up being 3 people there.
Well,
all
one of them
times.
would just have to leave. I mean,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, does it make sense for next Thursday, Fred's designated to go, can you go to Mark?
Yes.
And then you can say, this is a better time to have
Right.
these meetings. So figure out the alternate time.
Right.
so that- And then let everybody else know.
Okay. So you're gonna go Fred's gonna go next week, and then Mark's gonna work on adjusting that time, is that
I'm
correct?
going to go next week.
Oh, you're gonna go?
Right.
Okay.
And
And then
then,
at the meeting, I
Okay.
would work with them on
That sounds like.
an afternoon slot if that's possible.
Okay, and it's kind of the way that Ellen had done, initiated with the board docs, with our questions and any questions, sending that out, and then you reporting out to the board after the meeting.
Well, did
would
you
be
want to do
helpful.
that? Because I think when we had our meeting, you had asked for one report coming
Right.
directly from me, and then the board members filling
Yes.
in the holes.
Yeah,
Okay.
so Joelle's going to, you know, what we talked about was Joelle would keep being the person who gives the update.
The
but-
actual
but-
update.
But whoever attended the meeting, the core meeting, which would be me and whoever else, would obviously look at the notes you're sending out and then either add to or whatever, if it's like, oh, wait a
Clarify,
minute, there's
yeah.
also something else.
Okay, and then but you'll ask for feedback from the board before the meeting, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or we know when they're gonna be, so we
Yeah.
just
We
tell
just
them.
send
Yeah.
feed, okay. Okay. Sounds like a plan. Board Policy Committee, we met today at 4 o'clock. Mr. Peterson, do you want to do a summation of that?
It was a much smaller number of policy changes from the one we had last fall.
Yeah.
So we will have a presentation, or we will have those policies available to us by our next meeting, and that'll be the first reading, and go from there.
Social media is becoming a very hot topic, Mr. Corbett said. It's very dynamic. I did talk to Mr. Corbett and asked him about some of the apps that we're, considering. I brought up the GPS. There's no need for a policy. He didn't think that anybody had a policy with the GPS. We also talked about the Stop It app. He said, once we actually get there we're going to use that app, then we can create a policy. He'll work to craft a policy. He doesn't know of one, and he said we were the first district they had heard of, not that we are the only district using it, but that we had heard of that had brought this to his attention. So when that time comes, we can get a policy in place for that, if we want. Okay. All right, so moving on, we have item 9, district committee reports. We have Transportation Appeals Committee. Gosh, I hope not. No.
None.
Cottonwood Valley Career Center report. Mr. Gilbride is not here. Safety and Security Meeting report.
No update.
Okay, School Foundations report.
Maybe anything?
Has anyone heard of the uphill, downhill race that Britt Wigman is working on?
Yeah.
So that's tentatively, the details aren't worked out. We hope June 1st, uphill, downhill. Ideally, it would be up 21 to the Parkway and back down. And it's to raise awareness around mental health and funds for the district to target mental health.
So I connected her with one of our students who came to the board meeting last year and showed interest and wanted to do something about the situation to make it better. So I understand that she connected with that student. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And we think we have some honors art students making a logo.
Wonderful.
On the t-shirt and the literature. So it's a great idea. I think it's very timely and commendable. So hopefully it works out. Gina and I are going to go to the meeting on Tuesday. We just hope that the location works out. It's a lot of logistics behind
It
the
is.
scenes.
It is. And then
Block off streets.
yeah, I'm sure. Seems like a good idea, but it is a shorter race, so hopefully.
1 mile up, 1 mile down.
That's correct.
It's a race, but we're there to kind of support each other. The students were going to come up with motivational signposts every 10th of a mile.
Right.
As you go up, you'll read it. And there's a post, kind of motivate you, and then on the way down as well. Hopefully, it all comes together. It's great.
I can't wait to see the two of you lead the race and run up that hill and down that hill. That will be.
Can't ride my bike. I got to do
Yeah,
it
there
with
you
my
go.
legs.
You'll be the, okay. Thank you very much for your work on that. That sounds great. PSO report.
Not a whole lot. However, we're coming into the spring season, and that means PSO hanging baskets will be for sale again this year. And I'm proud to say that I bought 4 of them last year, and they were the best baskets I ever had. Second thing is that the PSO council meets tomorrow, and they'll be voting on new leadership. Mr. Shipman is stepping down after
2
a couple of
years.
years. Yeah. So
Okay.
that's my report.
Very good. Let them know that a lot of people are interested in that, the hanging baskets and how they communicate. It's important. Hopefully we'll pass it on so we can, okay. Other board member reports. So Ellen, I'm just going to throw us out there. Mrs. Kramer and I had been in contact with AP Environmental teacher and trying to be supportive and helpful of that program. The students make a pitch for an idea or a product. They actually pitched to our mayors. That's who I knew was in attendance with their ideas. The students work on the idea and then pitch it to them, and the leadership is supposed to weigh in on that. So one of the students had reached out. I started reaching out because Brecksville has started a recycle initiative, hoping that eventually maybe bags are eliminated, is what my understanding is. And one of the students' ideas was to have a recycle bin, to sell recycle bins. So the student reached out to Mrs. Kramer and I know Mrs. Kramer, I wasn't able, I was out of town, but you met with those students and to help them kind of, get started. And
I hope that they have this idea to sell recycle bins to city residents so people don't have to use those plastic bags anymore. And they want to use the proceeds from the sale to fund some things at the high school. And they were going to reach out to you, Chris, but I think you've been on vacation.
I think that my administrative assistant actually has a meeting scheduled with your group.
Oh, okay.
I forwarded that along to her, and I think she has something scheduled already with them.
Well, I have to say, they came up with this project themselves, and they did ask if they could use the district email on Earth Day. They want to send the email out on Earth Day. They said they'd send it to me early next week, like Monday, so we could vet it, and just send it out to the district as a whole. And I said, sure.
Yeah.
Even though it's this environmental science class that's doing it. So anyway, I said they could use our district email, and they're going to use whatever they raise to do something at the high school. Anyway, so buy a recycle bin from this AP's environmental science class. The email should be going out April 22nd.
So thank you for supporting them, and this is the first year that they have done it where they're actually rolling out this whole idea to make it a reality. So we want to make sure we try and be as supportive as possible. Okay, and that's it. Anybody else have any other reports? Okay. Superintendent's, item 10, superintendent's announcements.
Just a couple. Our spring musical starts tomorrow. We are doing a matinee for our senior citizens in our community. We're providing them lunch here in this room. Then they will travel down the hall to a 1 p.m. matinee of our play Mamma Mia. And then the show starts actually Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night this week, all starting at 7 p.m. It's the sneak preview that I've seen. These kids are incredible. It's going to be just an incredible play, so I'm so excited to see it tomorrow. And secondly, I just wanted to share something absolutely wonderful that we did today. It was probably one of my proudest moments of being superintendent. We held a naturalization ceremony for 31 new American citizens in our high school gym today. Our federal judge came and swore them all in. Our kids gave speeches. We have one young lady here who became a natural citizen, she said 14 years ago. So she stood up and told about her experience and her family's experience about coming to this country and what it meant to her. We had Janet Chang stood up and talked about her journey as becoming a natural citizen here as well, and shared her story about her family. And the judge had a few words, and Sean Brennan organized this amazing event. It was so moving. We invited our 11th and 12th grade students to come and witness it. What a great lesson in just civics and how it was absolutely fantastic. So afterwards we went up to the judge and said, we would like to host one here every year. What a great hands-on learning experience for our kids. He absolutely did not hesitate. He said, I would love to do this, and this is one of the nicest naturalization ceremonies I have ever seen.
And so we're very proud of that. We were very fortunate to be able to do that today. And just, just a great story to see these wonderful people. And they were so excited. The one gentleman kissed his certificate, and it was just really, really incredible and very moving. So glad we were able to do that.
Mr. Brennan's leadership in his high school government is just unbelievable. He takes the students down to the city club, if you didn't know, and has them, and it's always something that they always come back and report on. He does a wonderful job. So for him to arrange this, please let him know how wonderful that is. And he's also a city council president, is he? Another city, yeah. So he lives it. So
yeah, he does.
He's an impressive individual.
Mike, did you want to
throw something in here? One of the people who received citizenship,
Oh, yeah.
full citizen, was a former student.
Yeah.
Wow.
And having that happen in his gymnasium, there was such pride.
Yeah, there was.
And I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah.
We had no idea when we were setting this up that that would happen. And so that was an incredible gift.
And you can tell he was beaming. He was beaming. It was a terrific thing, and if we can do this every year or however often possible, I think it's absolutely should be installed.
Yeah,
It just
I know.
really was terrific.
So we're going to get a regular date on the calendar to repeat this because it was just so incredible.
So I have the information also with the Mamma Mia. The robotics team is having dinner. Does anybody, it says April 5th and 6th, high school robotics fundraiser dinner and Mamma Mia show. You can buy a ticket. So my understanding is and you get the dinner, and the ticket costs $5, so the total thing will cost $20. Is that correct? You can order your dinner before the show, make it a whole night. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a great deal.
And then you don't, if you can't go to the show, you could just order the food as well, and the food looked pretty amazing. I would imagine that's helping fund their trip.
Yeah, it's funding their trip to the Worlds.
So if we could spread the word on that again, I know I got that in the high school update, but
Okay.
that would be something that we want to make sure we announce at the PSO
I will.
meeting as well, if you would make sure.
I will.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have anything else? I apologize. That's so wonderful. Okay. Superintendent's other business, we have, superintendent's consent agenda, item 11. We have A, certified recommendations, B, classified recommendations, C, supplemental recommendations, D, approval of superintendent's consent agenda. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion?
Any questions?
No? Okay, roll call.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes.
Mr. Dozen?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. Item 12, superintendent's other business. We have A, out-of-state field trip, Brooksville, Broadview Heights, Louisville, Kentucky. What team is that?
Robotics.
Robotics, thank you. B, what is it? ESCNEO Primary Service Agreement 2019-2021. C, Cleveland Hearing and Speech Agreement. D, bus driver and cafeteria rate increase. E, positions, contract substitute bus drivers. F, science courses in middle school. G, donations. H, approval of superintendent's other business. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Discussion or questions?
Any questions on any of the information provided?
Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes.
Mr. Dozen?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. Item 13, Treasurer's Consent Agenda. A, tax levy resolution. B, modification of budget appropriations. C, financial report, February 2019. D, meeting minutes for February 27, 2019. E, approval of Treasurer's Consent Agenda. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Discussion.
Great. If there are no questions about A and B, I'll proceed on to the financial report. But first of all, I'll ask, any questions about A or B in the items? If not, I'll move on to C. The financial report. I like boring, so I'll be brief. I know we only been here for a few hours, but in brief is typically not my middle name, although let's make it my middle name tonight. So I'm going to right to page 2, which really shows a fiscal year to date. And folks, these are February numbers. So this is fiscal year all the way through February. On the revenue side, I really can't be any more, I guess the forecast couldn't be any more close on the current general property tax collections. We continue to receive higher dividends and interest in item 1.06. So, to our benefit on the revenue side, we are at about 270,000 to a positive variance. I'll really go right into the expense side of things. I underestimated the number of retirees, so due to the fact that happened, and we had a lower annual Bureau of Workmen's Comp annual premium, both on the salary and benefits side, the forecast was, underestimated that expense. So to our benefit, purchase service supplies continue to be about 50 to 60,000 on an annual basis. That's actually somewhat stabilized on a fiscal year to date. So we'll continue to monitor that, but those are still some of the same culprits, or at least some of the same things that we kind of expected. Nothing too out of the ordinary. And then finally, if you go right to the bottom line, we're looking at right now, as it currently stands, roughly about $500,000 in positive variance. It is important to note that March, these are February numbers, March is when we will actually collect our last property tax collection, which is first half of 2018. And so we're pretty much on track. And March is also a three payroll month. So those numbers will be, somewhat considerably larger, million or so more. But other than that, I know briefly, just to kind of talk about the 45 million earlier in the pre-K through 5 construction, our new building. We are continuing to collect about 80,000 a month. Most of our funds are about 2.5% currently, managed by Huntington. So pretty happy with that return at this point, spread out over a number of months. So they actually have submitted their first draw, which is less than 100,000, but so they've been basically working for free in many respects. That's shook, that is. They've been doing a lot of work. So we've got their first draw request, which I'll probably be making tomorrow, but it's again a relatively small amount. Any questions about the forecast?
Yeah, Jeff, just one question or
Yeah.
maybe a comment.
Yep.
We talked, and it's been indicated before, that the interest that we're getting on the bond money is intended to be put back into the school project, the new building, right? I mean, they threw $1 million marker out there, right, on that letter that came out from David. So I guess my question or concern is that if we reflect it here, by putting it in here saying, well, we're generating all this extra revenue, but it's really not for our use per se. It's really going to be designated for the new school building.
Correct.
So, but by having it, and maybe this is just something we all just have to recognize, but it skews the numbers.
For the interest and dividends on general fund?
Is that interest?
Those are interest and dividends are only for general fund. If you look at page 5, the permanent improvement funds are a different bucket. Okay. That money currently is segregated over at Huntington, and that does not include.
Okay.
So the 200-something thousand of interest, dividends, pay to participate. We actually collected some.
That's just off general. That's right.
That's just
right,
only general fund.
That money is in the PI. Okay.
Right.
Never mind.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm glad we're talking about it. The other 6.7 that we, back in December, allowed about 13,000 of that. That was those premium bonds we sold. We're basically putting that into PI right now. So it's about 13,000 a month. Just to kind of talk about those things again. And then, but the 44.5, that was the original principal of the bond sale. That I leave that alone and just let that accumulate, as it should.
Okay.
So also, I think it'd be very important. I know we've had a lot on our plates, but I think as maybe the early summer months, after we get through, some of these topics of DD and get to our general minimum price or guaranteed minimum price, would love to have my investment folks come in and kind of talk about, kind of the makeup of that and talk about actual projections. I think it'd be, really a good thing for us to hear it from the horse's mouth, the folks that are working for us in that. So when the time is right, I'll propose that possibly make them one of our guest speakers to come in and talk about that. I think it'd be kind of good for you to hear. Great.
The Bureau Workman's Comp thing?
Yes.
Are the rebates all done and now it's just a lower premium?
No, there are still,
getting rebated?
I just met with, with Art, our consultant, and those are continuing.
How much did
B-
they
I went to-
overcharge people?
Well, that's for another day, I guess. But I think one of the things I learned in another meeting about 3-4 weeks ago with the BWC and actually OSBA out in Rutztown is that there's about $10 billion that has been accumulated in the BWC coffers. So I don't think that's that's public knowledge. And so, as much as they said that this rebate program wouldn't last very long, I can't guarantee it, nor will they. But we're hoping that it continues, and our premiums are less. And Chris can speak to the fact that he and his staff are doing a phenomenal job on keeping the the claims low or lower, and really trying to work those down. So I mean, it's really to his credit to try and get us into an even better rating, and thus that it lowers our annual premium. So it's always fun to catch up with Chris and also our consultant to kind of talk about the progress being made.
But this is the dangers of big government. They overbill you until it's so huge that they're embarrassed and they got to give you some of it back.
Right.
I mean, it's what happened here.
But then they sell it to you. Look at all these great things we're doing. We're giving you all this money back.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Would you love it?
Because we took too much on the front end.
We're giving you all of your money.
Yeah, here's your money. That's it.
We should see about $60,000 worth of grants come through them this year too. So they have lots of grant programs as well.
Sure, they're
All
flush.
good news.
Keep it coming.
Anything else for Mr. Hall? Okay. Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes.
Mr. Dozen?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. Item 14, closing items. A, announcements. B, adjournment. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Did you want to read the announcement first?
Oh, no, I was just trying to get, Sorry. Okay, so the announcement. The special board meeting will be held on April 10th, 2019 at 7 p.m. at the High School Media Center, which is up here. Additionally, the next regular meeting of the Board of Education is scheduled for April 24th, 2019 at 7 o'clock at the Brecksville Broadview Heights High School Auditorium. So please take note of the location changes.
And we're going to have a work session before
We are.
Are we starting that at 6?
So this is at 7:06. Okay, so if we could change that.
Yep, we'll put it out on the
So our work session will be at 6 for next week on April 10th, and then we will start the public engagement meeting
And they're both
at 7
here.
o'clock. And they're both here.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, roll call.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes.
Mr. Dozen?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. We are now adjourned. Thank you for coming.
9:31 p.m.